Chapter 850. While Song Nianqing was accumulating his power, he looked at the woman of unknown origin. The previous 3 swords were named Time, Place, and People. They were specially designed to deal with Xian Qi and even celestial state masters. They could forcibly absorb Qi and become stronger when faced with a strong opponent. Every time Song Nianqing comprehended a move, he would forge a new sword. He had been diligent in forging and nurturing swords all these years. He had poured a lot of effort into each of the 14 swords, complemented by original sword moves. They were all worthy of being called new swords. They were truly unprecedented. If an opponent of the same state underestimated him, he would definitely suffer a great loss. Song Nianqing had originally hoped to nurture 20 swords in his life and leave the final battle to Dong Tai or Wang Xianji. However, he could not disobey the emperor's order. He had to break out of seclusion and wander the Jianghu in a green robe with swords. However, he did not think that the crown prince of Biyao could bear the 14 swords. Song Nianqing suddenly widened his eyes. Time, place, and people. What's the harm in giving them all to you? The woman in white sneered. Her qi poured into the 3 swords like a flood. The purple, yellow, and white sword qi, as thick as an arm, circled wildly in her palms. The 3 swords suddenly cried out. It was a happy thing for a hungry man to eat his fill. However, if he died from eating too much, it would be a tragedy. The 3 shockingly chaotic sword qis instantly vanished into thin air. Song Nianqing exclaimed, "What a celestial state! Good, good, good!" The 2 were only 70 or 80 feet apart. Instead of being angry, the sword pool sect master smiled. He closed his eyes and gently touched the sword of courage in front of his chest with 2 fingers. He muttered to himself, "Old brother, the 7 swords who walked in front of you didn't die in vain." Luo Yang clapped her hands and laughed. "Dongyue's sword pool has hundreds of years of history and this is all you've got?" Song Nianqing did not open his eyes. He smiled and said, "Watch me carry the lamp to see the world." The old man in a green robe handed out his sword. The next scene was not shocking. In the eyes of outsiders, it would only be funny. It was like a child who had just started to practice swordsmanship. He could barely lift the heavy sword in his hand and staggered around. His steps were messy and the momentum of his sword was distorted. Although his figure and sword moves were chaotic, his speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, the distance of 70 to 80 feet had been reduced to a distance of 2 sword moves. When people practiced swordsmanship, their seniors and great teachers would always advise them not to be controlled by the sword. That kind of swordsmanship would never amount to anything. Song Nianqing, who could be counted as one of the few great grandmasters in the way of the sword, did the opposite. He moved with his sword. There was no majestic sword aura that surged like a bull, nor was there a vast and righteous sword will. Just like that, he arrived in front of Luo Yang. Luo Yang frowned and shot out a palm. Under the influence of the sword of Zhao Dan, Song Nianqing actually dodged Luo Yang's palm. The tip of his sword was aimed at her shoulder. For the first time, Luo Yang left the central axis of the street. She took a step sideways and pinched the tip of the sword of Zhao Dan with 2 fingers. Before Luo Yang could exert her strength, the tip of the sword twisted. Song Nianqing's body spun and a splendid sword flower blossomed. Luo Yang flicked her finger. Song Nianqing withdrew his sword and turned half a circle to attack Luo Yang's back. This time, Luo Yang did not attack. Her feet did not move and her body fell backward. The sword had clearly missed, but the sword qi exploded like a firecracker where Luo Yang fell. Luo Yang's feet were still on the ground, but she turned her body to the left and barely dodged the sword qi. However, Song Nianqing did not show mercy. His long sword continued to entangle endlessly. For a moment, the sword qi around the 2 of them was like a cloud. It was too much for the eyes to take in. Luo Yang finally took a step forward. The sword qi of Zhao Dan in Song Nianqing's hand also began to show its magnificence. The ground of the street and the buildings on both sides of the street were smashed into pieces. Dust rose everywhere. Luo Yang walked and stopped, allowing the majestic sword qi to wreak havoc. She smiled and said, "It seems to be traceless, but in fact, it follows the winding of the world's dragon veins. It can be said that I have touched the threshold of the celestial state." The two of them resumed Luo Yang's position in the south of the northern Song dynasty. The demoness in white who disturbed the Jianghu of Beimang and Liang held the sword to her neck tightly. Song Nianqing suddenly opened his eyes and shouted angrily. He took a step forward and pushed the tip of the sword 3 feet forward. Luo Yang calmly took a small step back. The tip of the sword was less than 2 feet away from her neck. The abundant upstanding qi that came out of the sword messed up 2 strands of hair on her temples. Her sleeves fluttered as she held the sword. Luo Yang, who was not flustered at all, ignored the blood flowing from her palm. She looked straight at Song Nianqing and said with a smile, "Where did you get so many celestial state fingers? Get out." Luo Yang held the sword edge tightly and pushed it back. Song Nianqing, who refused to give up the sword, was hit in the heart by the sword hilt. Luo Yang seemed to be angry at his indiscretion and kicked the old man in green in the chest. The cloth shoes were worn thin by the ground. Song Nianqing, whose feet were off the ground, was almost at the same level with the sword. He pushed the tip of the sword 2 feet away from the woman in white's neck. "I gave you an inch and you wanted a mile." Luo Yang actually moved the tip of the sword 1 foot closer to her neck. She sneered and then slapped down with her palm. She directly broke the long sword with her palm. Since the sword was broken, Song Nianqing had to retreat. Luo Yang did not bother to beat a drowning dog. She casually threw away the broken sword and let Song Nianqing rush back to the old horse with the sword. Song Nianqing was hit in the heart by the sword hilt and kicked. Blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. He tried to calm down. The old man's face was full of disbelief. If he was fighting against Wang Xinji, the number 1 in the world, he would be in such a sorry state. But how could an unknown young woman in Jianghu be so domineering? Or was it because he was too ignorant? What the woman in white said next really made Song Nianqing flustered and exasperated. As an old man who occupied a place in the sword world, no matter how good he was at maintaining his composure, he could not stay calm. "I'll teach you how to use the sword." Chapter 851. On the second floor of the restaurant, Luo Yang added fuel to the fire of the sword qi that was connected to the sword. The sword qi instantly surged, startling Su Fengnian. He hurriedly manipulated the 8 swords to form a lightning pool to defend himself. The sword qi and the sword qi seemed to be fighting against each other. The sword qi struck the flying swords, producing incessant tinkling sounds. Su Fengnian's actions were also unexpected. He was not in a hurry to destroy the sword qi. Instead, he fought and retreated. He moved around on the second floor, chipping away at the sword qi bit by bit until the sword qi was completely eliminated. After that, Luo Yang went downstairs and pressed on. Song Nianqing could not care less about the person upstairs. The 2 swords of morning bell and evening drum, followed by the 3 swords of favorable timing, favorable location, and favorable person, followed by the sword illuminating courage, totaling 8 swords. They were all worthy of being called new swords. Especially the 3 swords that stole the celestial phenomenon realm and the sword illuminating courage that followed. They were all eye-opening to Su Fengnian. Putting aside the unconventional flying swordsmanship, Su Fengnian's swordsmanship could barely be considered to have reached a higher level. However, he had a good eye. Song Nianqing of the sword pool handed over sword after sword according to the prescribed order. Even though Su Fengnian had been carefully guarding against Master Lu Hao who was hiding in the shadows, he did not dare to take his eyes off of it. Looking at swords was like admiring calligraphy. A layman might only think that the calligraphy was written with dragon and snake strokes, but if it was him holding the brush, he would not be able to grasp the essence of calligraphy. This was why most people in Jianghu wanted to be guided by a master. Su Fengnian was like a spectator who often watched calligraphy. Some of the calligraphy that entered his eyes were graceful and charming, some were clear and vigorous, some had a solemn atmosphere. However, they all happened to be pleasing to him. Su Fengnian had an arrogant thought that no one knew about. He hoped that one day he could forge a furnace and form a sword altar and a large peak. There were not many trees on the peak, but they must all reach the sky. Su Fengnian glanced at old Ma, who was carrying a sword on his back on the street. He wondered if Song Nianqing's remaining 6 moves could cross Xianji and reach celestial phenomenon. If he stayed at Xianji, it would be impossible for him to hurt Luo Yang. Luo Yang was not a member of the 3 sections. She was a real martial artist. Like Wang Xianji, she was extremely domineering. She had fought Tuoba Bodhisattva, Deng Taya, and Hong Jingyan, who were the top 5 experts in the new martial arts ranking. She had even pulled Hong Jingyan down from the 4th position and replaced him. Against such a flawless demoness, even Celestial Phenomenon Sword would not have a 50% chance of winning, let alone Xianji. After a short moment of anger, Song Nianqing sighed and said, "This old man has poor eyesight and has been in seclusion all year round. I didn't expect to become a frog at the bottom of the well. Only now did I remember that there was a woman in white blocking useless monk by the green crossing river. I finally guessed your identity. I don't know if it's too late." Luo Yang said she wanted to teach Song Nianqing a sword, but she did not take out a sword from anywhere. She also did not use any external object to make a sword. She just put her left hand across her chest with her palm facing up and her right hand slowly pressed down. Song Nianqing, who was standing beside the horse, looked up at the gray sky. He wiped the 6 swords hanging on the horse's back. The swords were not out of their sheaths. 3 swords pointed to the ground while the other 3 hung in the air. They fell randomly in all directions, looking messy. Song Nianqing muttered to himself, "This old man has been holding a sword all his life. He only saw it as a troublesome matter to pass on the incense. He was afraid that it would delay the progress of his swordsmanship. 40 years ago, he had a hint of enlightenment and almost achieved the sword of celestial sword. 20 years ago, by chance, I was watching the sea of clouds rise and fall in a blessed place. A red sun rose from the east, as if it had suddenly jumped into the world. I was touched again, but I still gave up on that sword. Since then, he went into seclusion. He only wanted to progress step by step. He wanted to enter celestial phenomenon before becoming a celestial immortal. Gradually, he learned that this old man was born in the sword pool. The first sword he chose was a peerless sword. The first sword manual he received was a top-notch secret manual. The first time he cultivated his inner strength was also a peerless heart mantra. The master who taught me swordsmanship was a grand master of swordsmanship. Everything went smoothly for him, but his swordsmanship cultivation was left far behind by some people who came from the countryside. Only then did he know that everything would cry out when there was injustice. This old man did not have any injustice in his heart, so how could he resonate with heaven and earth? Luo Yang did not care about Song Nianqing's enlightenment, nor did she care about the 6 swords standing between heaven and earth. Her palms seemed to be pressed together, but there was still a gap. A vision of heaven and earth. Su Fengnian sucked in a breath of cold air. The highest point in the city was the bell tower of a Taoist temple. The sharp eaves of the tower seemed to be pressed down by an invisible celestial being and snapped. Immediately after, the bell tower collapsed in an unusually smooth manner. The 1,000-year-old tower in the city, second only to the bell tower of the Taoist temple, also began to collapse. All the taller buildings in the city began to collapse together, showing a scene of being cut down by a knife. The huge city was like a piece of tofu on a chopping board, easily cut by a knife. The more it was cut, the thinner it became. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian did not dare to stay on the 2nd floor. He floated to the ground, only to hear the ear-piercing noise of thousands of kilograms of gravity crushing wood and stone. Su Fengnian gently stamped his foot and then laughed bitterly. Not only was the heavens moving down, but the ground was also restless. It was like a great Buddha overlooking heaven and earth with its palms pressed together. There was nowhere to hide. Heaven and earth were in harmony, leaving only a line. This line was Luo Yang's sword. Song Nianqing's expression was grave. The 3 swords in the air pierced upwards, while the 3 swords on the ground penetrated downwards. Clearly, he was doing his best to assume a mighty posture of indomitable spirit. This line between heaven and earth was still 3 zhang high. Needless to say, the high walls of the city had long been completely destroyed. The elite cavalry that had been transferred from outside the city to clear out the city had really hit the mark by a stroke of luck. If not for their foresight, under the might of Luo Yang's mighty sword, the nearly 10,000 corpses would have been nailed to the ground. The more the situation was settled, the more Su Fengnian did not forget that Lu Haosher, Murong Longshui, and Spider Web Moth were still hidden in the city. Murong Longshui and the old man were indeed in the city, and they were not far from here. They were 3 streets away. Murong Longshui was sitting on the wall of a low alley. He had gotten a pot of wine from somewhere and was sitting cross-legged on it. He used his robe to wrap it up and eat. Old Moth stood in the middle of the alley and did the same action as Su Fengnian. He stomped hard and the entire alley's bluestone slabs cracked. The old man sighed and said, "Who would have thought that after the battle between Woyang and Bodhisattva Tuoba in the icy plains of the extreme north, his methods had become even more vicious? Princess, with her here, do we still have to interfere? I'm just afraid of pulling chestnuts out of the fire. Before we can eat the roasted chestnuts, we'll get into trouble instead." Murong Longshui bent his finger and flicked a few peanuts, one near and one far. He watched them explode and said, "This immortal's method of controlling heaven and earth is the same as borrowing a sword from the Great Snow Plateau. After all, it's not invulnerable. Sword, immortal swords are invincible. You and I are destined to be discovered, but it's not impossible to fight for a chance of survival. Right now, I'm just afraid that the guard dog of the Zhao family in Great Peace City will act shamelessly and insist on waiting for Luo Yang to deal with us before making a move. But then it'll be even harder for him to kill Su Fengnian. It'll depend on Lu Haosher's decision. Presumably, Su Fengnian's head should be worth more than the 2 of us combined. Besides, I heard that this old man has a personal grudge with the Bailiang. In short, let's watch from afar. Luo Yang's temperament is unpredictable. If we annoy her, I don't want to die in Liang." Murong Longshui landed softly in the alley. Old Moth had already left quickly. The tall and strong Junju glanced at Old Moth's hurried back and smiled. On the street, Song Nianqing's 3 swords in the air started to fall, the 3 swords in the ground started to rise. All 6 swords trembled and wavered. Song Nianqing closed his eyes and focused. A person had 7 orifices. Every time a sword broke, the sword master, Song Nianqing, would bleed from one orifice. When all 6 swords were broken, Song Nianqing's eyes, ears, and arms were bleeding profusely. The miserable state of this great swordsman was truly frightening. But Song Nianqing's expression was still calm. Since only 6 of his 7 orifices were bleeding, it meant that other than the 14 swords on horseback on the surface, the number 1 of the sword pool, Song Nianqing most likely had another sword hidden. When Song Nianqing finally spoke and attacked, Su Fengnian, who was most likely leaving behind his last words, had only guessed half right. The Junju and Old Moth were in the city, but Lu Haosher was not hiding in the city. 10 li away from the city. An old man with an old-fashioned face stood where he was. When Luo Yang's hands began to close the sky and the earth, he began to move his feet extremely slowly. The first step was not even half of an ordinary person's step. The second step was slightly faster, no different from an ordinary person's. The third step was the distance of an ordinary person's 2 steps. And so on and so forth. The sky and the earth were like thunder, rushing towards the city. Chapter 852. Shenjiafang was one of the best villas in Tianyuan. It had many people, deep mountains and remote rivers, and cultivated diligently while avoiding war. Its feng shui was extraordinary. An old man and a young girl walked through the fields. It was cold and frosty, but the fields were not soft. There were some shriveled eggplants on the fields. The old man bent down to pick a few and put them in his pocket. The young girl behind him wore a cheap mink hat and looked back from time to time. The old man was still talking to himself. "Don't look at the eggplants now. After being frosted, they are sweet when they enter the mouth." The taste is no worse than the cushion carp in winter and can compete with the winter bamboo shoots. Later, find a family and I will personally cook a pot for you. Shen Jiafeng owed me a big favor. Back then, I was the one who picked this treasured land for them. Not to mention a few worthless eggplants, even if it was a few lives, would have taken them away just like that. You, don't look at me. Since I found Luo Yang as a helper for that boy, his life and death are 50-50. Don't stare at me. Yes, I let him fall into this trap, but he made my daughter suffer such a big loss. If I don't scheme against him, who will I scheme against? As for me, generally speaking, I don't help anyone. Even though the emperor of Dongyue indulged in sensual pleasures, I still managed to protect most of the Dongyue imperial family. The last emperor of southern Tang worked hard to govern the country and had great talent and vision. He could be considered a wise ruler. But now, everyone in southern Tang has the surname Hong. According to the logic that people of the present age like to talk about, the shady business that I did was completely unreasonable. When I asked you to assassinate that boy, I told you that he was unlucky and would die sooner or later. Rather than dying on a woman's belly or in the hands of others, it would be better to die in your hands. At least his body would be intact and there would be a place to be buried. Compared to the thousands of lonely souls and wild ghosts, how could it be worse? It would have been better if the old man didn't say anything. Once he said these principles that were drier than eggplants, the young girl simply stopped walking. She carried the sunflower and looked at the city dozens of miles away. The old man was embarrassed and reached out to grab a handful of sunflower seeds. The young girl twisted her body in a fit of pique and spun around with the withered sunflower, not letting him have his way. The old man was surprised and squinted his eyes. He saw that the city in the distance was swaying in the wind and rain. His sea of chi rumbled and fell, as if heaven and earth were squeezing a line. He sighed and rubbed his daughter's mink hat and whispered, "It is the heartless people are the most infatuated." The old man didn't get any response. Fortunately, he was already used to it. He weighed the eggplants in his pocket and found that it wasn't enough for lunch, so he picked a few more. Only then did he talk to himself, if the 20 to 30,000 people in the city can't be dispersed in time, Luo Yang's move will incur the wrath of heaven and the wrath of men. The people of the three religions and Longhu Mountain can't even fend for themselves. But according to Li Xiaoxin's temperament of the two Zen temples, he will definitely make a move. Before entering first pin, especially below second pin, there is a simple way to break through the armor. One punch will break through the armor, and one sword will pierce through the armor. It is clear at a glance. But after entering second pin, especially after first pin, there is no such thing as this method is too inflexible. People are alive. Dong Tai's sword can be said to be the pinnacle of swordsmanship. It can easily break through thousands of armors. However, if the person wearing the armor knows martial arts, the power will be greatly reduced. If Wang Xianji wears the armor, even Dong Tai can't easily break through the armor. Could Dong Tai be a beginner in swordsmanship? The sages of the three religions are blessed by heaven. Li Xiaoxin cut the river to send a gift to Taoist sect. If the river water was thrown down, it wouldn't be difficult to drown thousands of Beimeng people. But how could it drown a few second-pin martial artists? This is the reason why the sages of the three religions don't enter the martial arts evaluation. If they want to borrow the power of heaven and earth, they have to act according to God's will. Wang Xianji and Tuoba don't need to do that. In the past 200 to 300 years, there are only 3 cases where the sages of the 3 religions killed more than one person. The first one was when the Wu family broke through 10,000 cavalry with 9 swords. The second one was when Li Chungang broke through 2,600 armors with 1 sword. The last one was when Luo Yang went south not long ago. Not only were the opponents fully equipped with armors, but they were also skilled in martial arts. Especially the latter two, after reaching the celestial state, even if it wasn't as obvious as the sages of the 3 religions, they would more or less be influenced by fate. Sometimes, killing a nameless pawn would cause more trouble than killing a general. Zhao Go took the lead to send the elite cavalry to drive away the people in the city. This is mostly the idea of Master Lu Hao. An old man who doesn't die is a thief, and a thief is a coward. Master Lu Hao is afraid that Luo Yang will be unscrupulous when she attacks. When the purple thunder strikes, even if Luo Yang bears 70 to 80% of the damage, he will be affected by it. However, he has stayed in the celestial state for too long and is suspected of being a follower of the emperor, so he will still be punished. You should know that the saying that those who don't know are not guilty is most suitable for those in the celestial state. The people of the three religions, because they know too many secrets of heaven that they can't reveal, have their hands tied. Luo Yang's time in the celestial state is relatively short, and she is not a member of the three religions, so she can do whatever she wants. The girl squatted on the ground and silently kneaded the mud. Huang Longshi, who occupied the top 3 ranks of spring and autumn, exhaled a mouthful of fog and said softly, "Those who don't know me ask what I want. Who knows who I am? Sun Ping knows the half-tongue of Great Peace City, but we have different ideals and paths. Li Shan, the poison warrior of Bailiang, knows, but 2 tigers cannot live on one mountain. There is no place for him in Liyang. Nalan Yusi also knows, but he is born the opposite of me. The scholar rules the country, the scholar rules the world, and the scholar brings disaster to the country. These 3 people each have their own desires, and I'm afraid this is the last bright time for the strategists. In the future, we won't be able to see such a scene of our generation of scholars turning the world upside down. In the future, the scholars are all actors in the imperial family." The old man with a full bag of eggplants smiled and said, "The backbones of the scholars of spring and autumn are crooked, I want to straighten them out. The martial artists of spring and autumn use their power to restrict, I want to destroy thousands of secret manuals, put reins on them, and turn wild dogs into domestic dogs. I want to teach the world in the next few hundred years, there won't be any Jianghu green-robed men wielding swords, there won't be any Earth Immortal dynasty traveling to the North Sea and sunset at Kangwu, and there won't be any Daoist ascending to the heavenly gate on a crane." The girl, Jia, laughed. Huang Longshi suddenly laughed self-mockingly. "In the past, Li Xiaoxin scolded me for thinking that I was righteous even when I farted. He scolded me well." The girl's stomach rumbled with hunger. The old man laughed and took her to the village. The Shen family did not know Huang Longshi's true identity and only thought that he was a mysterious celestial alchemist. In the past, Huang Longshi had pointed out the right path, allowing the Shen family of southern Tang to escape a disaster and leave behind this bloodline. Even the genealogy of the family's lifeblood was written by Huang Longshi himself. When the elders of the imperial family in the village heard that their benefactor had come to visit, they insisted on setting up a feast. However, Huang Longshi did not agree and only borrowed a kitchen and a jar of wine to be alone with his daughter, Jia. The old man personally cooked and fried a carp and a plate of eggplants. The old man did not eat much and only drank a few cups of wine before he became drunk. The room was dim and the candlelight swayed. The old man rested his head on the table with drowsy eyes. When he closed his eyes, his tears were faintly discernible. He murmured softly, "1,000 years of affairs with banana deer, I dream of butterfly dreaming of me." Chapter 853. The little girl took off her warm mink hat and gently put it on the old man's head. She rested her chin on the table and looked at the sleeping old man, lost in thought. In the city, both sides were in high spirits. The world only left a line to form a sword. Luo Yang, the world's #1 devil, performed an unprecedented sword move in the celestial state. Song Nianqing's ears, eyes, nose, and nose were bleeding, but he kept his mouth shut. In the city, the broken swords were still intact. Under the support of the round sword embryo, 6 sword chi as thick as an adult man's thigh stood between heaven and earth. There was a faint sound of bells and drums, melodious and surging. The line between heaven and earth was like grinding a millstone, and the gap was only the height of a person. Sand and pebbles were flying in the dark, but it still couldn't destroy the 6 sword embryos on the spot. This time, the master of Sword Pool, who didn't put on airs, only changed into a new pair of plain green cloth shoes. At this time, the soles of the shoes made of many layers of white cloth were mostly worn out, which made Song Nianqing feel a little regretful. In this life, He focused on the sword Dao and never had any romantic feelings. He didn't know why he and the woman who married into Sword Pool had stopped at treating each other with respect. But for some reason, in the face of a great enemy and on the line of life and death, he remembered the night when he lifted her veil and her shy face under the candlelight. After so many years, he didn't know when she slowly became a frost-haired old woman, nor did he know when she made this pair of shoes herself. When they parted and took over the luggage that he regarded as a burden, he only thought it was natural for a woman to take care of the family. Now, he realized how good it would have been if he took over the luggage, called her nickname, and thanked her. Song Nianqing remembered many things in the past. When he was in the prime of his life, he carried 12 swords and went to the martial emperor's city in high spirits to challenge the world's #1. When he left home, she didn't say much. She just smiled and helped him tidy his clothes carefully. She walked him to the door and stood there alone, not waiting for him to turn back. Later, when Song Nianqing returned home, he passed by her with a cold face. She wanted to say something but stopped. She just squeezed out a clean smile without any grievance. In the past, Song Nianqing had always been indifferent, so it was inevitable that he would feel a little gloomy. Why had he found such a dull and boring woman? How was she worthy of his sword? This fatal absent-mindedness should have caused Song Nianqing's accumulation of power to be thwarted. Unexpectedly, in that moment of absent-mindedness, for the first time in his life, he felt guilty. Song Nianqing only felt that his sword heart was as clear as glass in that instant. Outside the city, there were originally more than 100 Sword Pool swordsmen carrying huge sword sheaths on their backs. Before Luo Yang made her move, they had already begun to gallop around the city. Wherever they passed, flying swords would fly out of their sheaths and float in the air outside the city walls, stopping and not falling. Outside the city, there were already nearly 1,000 swords hanging in the air. The sword formation was majestic, the sword momentum vast and mighty. But the swordsmen of Sword Pool who had reined in their horses looked at each other in dismay. Because the swords hanging outside the wall had all fallen to the ground at the same time. Without the guidance of the Qi, the sect master seemed to have given up on the idea of using the sword formation. But this sword formation should be the sect master Song Nianqing's hidden 14th sword. With the sect master's temperament, it was impossible for him to choose to wait for death in the face of a strong enemy. Since the sect master had always regarded Wang Xianji, the martial emperor, as the last opponent in his life, even if he encountered a rare strong opponent in the city, he would not end up like this. For a moment, the swordsmen who had stopped were at a loss and felt a strong sense of crisis. But when the swordsmen of Sword Pool successively perceived the increasing strong sword intent in the city according to their realm, they were pleasantly surprised. Song Nianqing lowered his head and took a deep look at his shoes. He smiled slightly, allowing the 6 wisps of sword chi to vanish in the millstone and the flying wood and rolling stones to hit his face. He gently stepped on the only intact street under his feet and heavily spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Finally, he could not suppress the blood surging in his throat and spat it out in front of him. Soon, it was covered by dust and disappeared. Song Nianqing said softly, "It's time to go to Jianghu for you." Song Nianqing stepped on the ground and began to run wildly. The last sword was also the last time he went to Jianghu. Song Nianqing himself was the sword. Song Nianqing's sword collided with Luo Yang's sword. Song Nianqing's clothes and skin seemed to have been cut into pieces and began to turn into a bloody mess. But this sword Dao Grandmaster did not feel it at all. He laughed heartily and flashed across a green rainbow. He gave up the mighty sword formation of 1,000 swords in exchange for a sword immortal sword that seemed inexplicable to others. This sword could be said to be invincible in the world. It tore apart Luo Yang's heaven and earth. The world was dark and cloudy. Song Nianqing's sword chi was like a painting of an immortal riding a dragon. Song Nianqing himself could not be seen. Only the sword chi, lightning, clouds, and rain could be seen. Luo Yang, who did not expect Song Nianqing to have such a sword, held her breath and concentrated. Her chi circulated 800 miles in an instant. The 3 mystical powers of the Vajra finger and the mysterious celestial phenomenon fused together. It was obvious that she wanted to prove that Song Mianqing's fatal sword could not seriously injure her. In fact, when the two were still several feet apart, Song Mianqing was already on the verge of death. But the sword chi was still growing and majestic even when he was on the verge of death. Luo Yang pushed out with both hands. Her sleeves were torn and her hair fluttered in the wind. As if she was wrestling with a dragon, her feet kept slipping back. At this critical moment, outside the city, a bolt of lightning exploded into the city. It was so fast that when the lightning entered the city, 2 riders of the sword pool were lifted off the ground and flew into the city. The lightning broke through the wall, but the 2 swordsmen and their horses crashed into the wall that was as tall as a person. With 2 bangs, they turned into 2 pools of blood. They did not have the strength to fight back and died on the spot. Luo Yang turned her head to look to the east with difficulty. There was a trace of unwillingness and anger in her eyes. The lightning, which was well versed in the resonance of heaven and earth and was thus well hidden, arrived in the blink of an eye. Luo Yang did not expect that Song Mianqing would risk his life to use the sword immortal sword. She also did not expect that Lu Haosher would point his spear at her from the beginning, instead of the guy who wanted to kill her in the Liang imperial court. Luo Yang gritted her teeth. The 2 blue and red fish tried their best to reveal a small part of their ethereal body, trying to block Lu Haosher's timely sneak attack. A white shadow rushed to Luo Yang's side almost at the same time as Lu Haosher, forcibly withstanding the full force of the celestial state's attack. Even if this reckless guy only won a blink of an eye, Lu Haosher had already brushed past Luo Yang and the sword chi. Lu Haosher was furious. After weighing the pros and cons in his heart, he did not chase after the white-clothed devil who had lost the best opportunity to severely injure him. Instead, he rushed toward the little bastard who ruined his good plan. From the center of the city to the west of the city, the back of the figure crashed through many walls. In front of the last wall, Lu Haosher's 5 fingers formed a hook, as if grabbing something from the body of the person, while his other hand punched out, smashing the guy from inside the city to outside the city. With a cold face, Lu Haosher crushed the chi in his hand, which was faintly visible like a lotus swaying in the wind. He sneered, "You overestimate yourself. You dared to ruin this old man's plan of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. This old man not only wants you dead, but also wants you to lose everything before you die." The ear-piercing scream of a woman came from inside the city. It was so sad that it made Lu Haosher's heart palpitate for no reason. Chapter 854. There are 2 more chapters for today. A person suddenly broke through the wall and left the city. The swordsmen who had just picked up their swords from the sword pool outside the wall were startled. After recognizing the young man's unfamiliar face, they felt relieved. At first, they thought it was the top 3 swordsmen in the world who had been beaten out of the city. This time, they had left the sword pool in full force. A small group had followed Li Yibai to the Swift Snow Mountain Villa, while a large group of elites had followed the sect master on a secret mission. When they got close to the city, they took turns to pass a portrait. The sect master's order was simple and comprehensive. If they saw the person in the portrait, they would be killed without mercy. The nearby swordsmen on horseback also quickly gathered around. As the sword sect's unique sword-flicking mystic skill sounded, more and more swordsmen rushed over. The person in the portrait seemed to be seriously injured. After struggling for a while, he still could not stand up and sat on the ground. His face was haggard and his complexion was obscure. It was obvious that he had fallen into a miserable state where his soul, essence, chi, and spirit were violently fluctuating. He did not pay attention to the swordsman of Sword Pool who had shrunk the encirclement. He clenched his fists and stared at the old man in embroidered clothes on the other side of the hole in the city wall. He had lived a comfortable life in the most virtuous city in the world all year round and held a high position. The old man's aura was strong. The difference between the aura inside and outside the city was obvious. In the dim light, Master Lu Hao, who was not inferior to the young man in the north, slowly walked out, making the people of Sword Pool feel suffocated. Only a few people with the best cultivation of swordsmanship managed to stop their mounts from retreating. Most of the swordsmen involuntarily followed their horses and retreated. Master Lu Hao sneered in his heart. This kid had been shrewd and sneaky for more than 20 years. He even managed to leave the Great Peace City alive. He did not expect that he would get carried away, and in the end, he could only seek his own death. If he had not blocked the side of the female devil, Master Lu Hao could have cooperated with Song Nianqing's Earth Immortal sword and seriously injured the new leader of Zhulu Mountain. If this kid had been smarter, he would have fled the city earlier and allowed Luo Yang to hold him and Song Nianqing back. Although there was a slim chance of survival, there was still a slim chance of survival. Since this kid did not want to die, Master Lu Hao would not be courteous to him. During the 4 to 5 li journey, Master Lu Hao, who was a master of celestial state, not only dispersed the kid's vigorous qi that was desperately protecting his body, he also took the opportunity to pull out the half-opened big yellow lotus from his dantian. This was an unexpected surprise. Even Master Lu Hao, who was used to seeing storms, could not help but laugh to the sky. He had worn out his iron shoes to search for something, but found it without any effort. Back then, he had failed to kill that female sword immortal in the capital. All these years, he had been unable to eat or sleep in peace. Now, not only was Lame Su's lifespan almost up, if he could kill this young man who should have died in the womb back then he would have no more worries. The Lu family of Nanyang, who worshipped him as their ancestor, might not necessarily be unable to surpass him and become a new noble family that rose after the smoke of war. Lu Haoshe walked from the inside of the city to the outside of the city. From the moment he took away the golden lotus that was the foundation of the Great Yellow Court, he did not stop for even a moment. His hands that came out of his sleeves were constantly and secretly tapping his fingers, completely tearing apart the qi around the young man so that he could no longer create a new climate. The two great masters of Great Peace City, Han Jiaoxi was in the open while Lu Haoshe was in the dark. Their identities were completely different and their methods were completely different. However, there was one thing that they were very similar, and that was that they were too lazy to care about the righteousness of Jianghu. They were very practical, just like the political skills of the blue-eyed Zhang Julu. Lu Haoshe was not indecisive because of his identity as a senior, and did not let his guard down because victory was in his grasp. He watched as the white-haired young man's qi gradually faded under his fingers. Lu Haoshe's eyes burned with passion, as if he had opened a jar of wine that had been in the cellar for more than 20 years. Su Fengnian struggled to stand up, but Lu Haoshe, who was watching coldly from the side, kicked him in the air. It was as if he had been kicked in the face, and he fell back a few feet. Lu Haoshe continued to move forward. Every step he took seemed to be very casual, but in fact, it would affect the weather of heaven and earth. As he stepped heavily on Su Fengnian's body and chaotic qi, Lu Haoshe calmly said, "The otherworldly item that helped you in Great Peace City swallowed the purple gold qi of the first heavenly master of Dragon Tiger Mountain at the Spring God Lake. Right now, it is full and has not finished digesting it. It is at the moment when its yin and yang are alternating. Since you want to use it as a trump card to deal with this old man, then you should obediently avoid it and obediently act like a grandson. Why did you help the woman of Zhulu Mountain take that blow from this old man? Even if it could endure for a few more hours, it would still be better than this situation. It could only watch helplessly on the side as it suffered together with you. It could only continue to instill cultivation into you in a futile attempt to prolong its life, allowing this old man to step on both your body and its soul. Although this old man has killed countless people in his life and has countless famous experts, it is still the first time he has killed a celestial phenomenon expert so casually by working together with that human cat. How interesting." Lu Haoshe continued to move forward step by step. Every step he took, Su Fengnian would let out a muffled sound, and a cloud of dust would rise. Lu Haoshe stopped and stomped heavily on the ground. Su Fengnian's body immediately sank into a large pit. The swordsman from Sword Pool, who had taken the initiative to move away, only saw a hand at the edge of the pit. It was covered in blood, and it was unwillingly reaching out inch by inch. Lu Haoshe, who was cautious by nature, sent a secret message to Shermu. He smiled and said, "I heard that you, the Crown Prince of Bailiang, rushed to Beimeng alone. Along the way, you killed many people, including Xiaoling and Diwu Raccoon. When you returned to Liang, during the assassination at Iron Gate, which affected the situation in the capital. Even Yang Taisui was killed by you. You must be very smart, but how could you, with such a smart brain, take the initiative to be kicked by a donkey? For a she-devil of Beimang, who has no relatives or friends, you even gave up the hereditary position of the king of Biyao? You don't even want the 300,000 iron cavalry of Biyao? Lu Haoshi twisted the tip of his foot, and blood splashed out of the hand that reached out of the pit. The old celestial phenomenon expert sneered and asked the third question in a sinister tone. You don't even want to avenge your mother? Chapter 855. Su Fengnian could almost only hear the sound of his own heavy breathing. Lu Haoshi's three questions caused his eardrums to vibrate, and it was as if a bell was ringing in his heart. Su Fengnian did not dare to cut off the telepathic connection with the red-robed otherworldly item. It was not because he was afraid of death, but because he was afraid that Suing would be stubborn and die before him. After breaking the wall and falling to the ground, he had a hidden thought. He hoped to use the opportunity to temper the purple-gold fate in Su Ying's body. Not only could he stall for time, but he could also let Suing recover her realm in advance. Unexpectedly, Master Lu Hao was a cunning old fox. Every step he took was full of mysteries. He only hurt Su Ying's skin but not her skin. He was indeed the old tortoise who had been hiding for the longest time in the celestial state. Su Fengnian turned over and lay flat in the pit. He forcibly cut off his connection with Su Ying's spirit and looked at the gray sky. His vision was blurry. Ever since he picked up the saber again, as long as he was determined to achieve something, he would advance step by step. He was afraid of death, so he did everything he could to cultivate the saber and nurture the sword. After reaching the first rank of Vajra, he obtained the Great Vajra, pseudo-finger mystery, and used all his fate to enter pseudo-celestial state. He stumbled his way up and fell again and again. There were gains and losses, and he did not even have the time to be complacent. Now that he suddenly looked back, he realized that he had achieved many feats that he did not even dare to imagine before he started practicing the saber. Su Fengnian slowly closed his eyes and thought of something Su Xiao said. No one deserved to die from the beginning, and no one could not die. Su Fengnian's mind suddenly flashed with a picture of the spring god lake that he desperately wanted to remember but could not. Su Fengnian, whose consciousness was blurred, was instantly immersed in it as if he was in the picture. It was a boundless autumn with golden wheat as far as the eye could see, and a gentle breeze blew. On a small path, there was a woman walking in front. She stretched out her slender hand and gently brushed the wheat, leaving an unforgettable back view. Su Fengnian's body somehow had a lofty feeling that the great Qin kingdom was destined to last forever. Su Fengnian looked down and held a heavy wheat in his hand. He suddenly raised his head, and the woman happened to turn her head. Just as he was about to see her face, the picture suddenly shattered and everything disappeared with the wind. He reached out to grab her, but the harder he tried, the more he failed. He only heard two words with a strange accent and yet contradictory as if he had heard them thousands of times. Huang Longshi, who was clearly dead drunk, slowly opened his eyes. The candlelight burned and occasionally made a faint sound like soybeans cracking. His daughter had long disappeared. The old man sighed in his heart. After he was chased out of the Shengyin Academy, he had told the emperors and ministers of the Spring and Autumn Kingdom countless hateful things. Unfortunately, they all loved to listen to him and were intoxicated. However, he had finally found a daughter who was willing to listen to him speak the truth, but she did not like to listen to his nagging. Huang Longshi poured himself a bowl of wine and took a sip. He picked up a very tasty braised carp with his chopsticks. Of all the flavors, spicy was the most important. If it was not spicy, it would be tasteless. This time, he acted as a matchmaker for Zhulu Mountain and West Chu. He acted as the middleman. Chao Changqing was the guest of Zhulu Mountain, while Zhulu Mountain provided money and manpower for the restoration of West Chu. He was busy, but it was only to delay the opportunity for the Zhao family to unify the world. Huang Longshi knew that everything he had done in this life was just to take advantage of the situation. Huang Zhentu, Wang Mingyin, Xianyuan Dandan, Li Chungang, Yang Taisui, Han Xingxian, Song Nianqing, including Lu Haoshi, Zhao Huangchao, Gu Jianteng, and so on, who most likely would not have a good ending. Counting with one's fingers, the older generation of Liang Jianghu seemed to have all died in one night. After the peace of the Central Plains, Huang Longsha transferred the fate of the world to Jianghu. The boiling water seemed lively, but it was nothing more than pulling up seedlings to help them grow and draining the pond to catch fish. The imperial examinations flourished. The imperial court, which revered only Confucianism, became more and more disciplined. The Jianghu, which was struggling at death's door, became more and more silent. The common people were at peace. Huang Longsha grabbed the mink hat from his head and glanced at the sunflower on the table. He smiled bitterly and said, "Daughter, why are you joining in the fun? I was still thinking that there was someone left who could clean my grave for me in the future." A young girl ran out of Xinjiafang, her raven hair slanted. Outside the small city of Liang that was not even worth mentioning, Luo Yang got rid of Song Mianqing a little faster than Lu Haosher expected. This was usually negligible, but here it was enough to turn the world upside down. In the history of the world, there were only a few sword immortals who had become land immortals. Many sword immortals only had one sword or one move that reached the land immortal realm. Wei Chao, the sword immortal of the previous dynasty, was like this. Song Mianqing's sword was unstoppable. In Lu Haosher's view, even Wang Xianji and Tuoba would have a headache if they were to fight against it. Song Mianqing's sword was already at the peak of the way of the sword. Lu Haosher had been influenced by Song Mianqing for a long time in the celestial realm. If he were to encounter it, he could only retreat. That year in Tai and City, the woman who had reached the land immortal realm was able to escape unscathed with that sword. It was enough to show the supreme power of the land immortal realm. Song Mianqing's sword that broke through two realms without any warning was undoubtedly a great harvest for Lu Haosher. It also made Su Fengnian and the woman in white suffer. In Lu Haosher's original plan, since he had sensed the existence of Luo Yang, he could only take advantage of the situation. After entering the city, no matter if he killed or seriously injured Su Fengnian, he could only retreat after one attack. Lu Haosher admitted that he had no chance of winning against Luo Yang, who could combine the heaven and earth into a single line of sword. It was the same when he met her before. However, after she took Song Mianqing's sword without hesitation, Lu Haosher did not think that there was such a big disparity between victory and defeat. The woman in white gave up the power of the sword that combined the heaven and earth and rushed to Su Fengnian's side. Her eyes were unreadable. Lu Haosher, who was secretly drawing with his fingers, sneered, "Demon Luo Yang, who ranked fourth in the world, is actually so reckless?" Luo Yang, who had her back to Lu Haosher, did not say anything. On the wall, a bright vermilion robe finally appeared. The otherworldly item held its head with its 5 arms and grabbed both sides of its face. Its sharp nails drew blood, and it was in so much pain that it could not make a sound. In the city, Song Mianqing, whose body was badly mutilated, staggered and sat on the ground. He reached out his trembling hands and struggled to take off his severely damaged cloth shoes. He gently held them in his arms and died in Jianghu. The black carp that Luo Yang relied on for survival had already dissipated in the sword energy in the city. Another red carp with long whiskers, which was also taken from Emperor Qin's mausoleum, appeared out of thin air. Luo Yang broke all of the dragon whiskers, and the dragon whiskers quickly merged into the blood vessels in her palm. Lu Haosher suddenly shook his sleeves. Luo Yang in white seemed to be hit hard in the back. After shaking violently, she did not fall. She leisurely exhaled a mouthful of golden mist and said softly, "I won't wait anymore. What you gave me 800 years ago, I will return it to you today. From now on, there will be no Qin empresses or Luo Yang in this world. What will happen to you and her in the future?" Luo Yang bit her thin lips and stopped talking. She let Lu Haosher's qi hit her back again and again. She exhaled the rich cultivation that she had accumulated for hundreds of years, which turned into a cloud of golden mist and filled Su Fengnian's body. Lu Haosher's face changed dramatically. Without hesitation, he began to retreat. Su Fengnian slowly stood up. His eyes were golden, and he stretched his body as if he was showing off to the world. Then, He quietly looked at the woman in white in front of him and said in a mellow voice, "Luo Yang?" The woman's figure gradually swayed and began to dissipate in the wind. Tears streamed down her face, but she bent down with a smile and pulled back her sleeves. It was just like the first time they met 800 years ago, when he had yet to proclaim himself emperor, when she was in the fields and had yet to enter the palace. Using a delicate voice that the devil Woyang would never utter, she softly called out, "Your Majesty." Chapter 856. In Xiangfan City, there was a graceful woman wrapped in silver like a fur coat. It was hard to imagine that 20 years ago it was a ghost city filled with a gloomy aura. She looked like a widow from a poor family who married into a rich family and suddenly changed her appearance. There was no trace of poverty, only the splendor of jewelry. A carriage slowly moved through a quiet and deep narrow alley. The horse's hooves clattered against the limestone floor, creating a series of crisp sounds. The coachman was a beautiful woman. She was called Apricot Flower and the Prince of Jing'an's estate. Everyone knew that she was young Master Lu's personal maidservant. As that blind young Master Lu's position in Xiangfan became more and more stable, her status also rose along with it. Even the head steward of the Prince of Jing'an's estate had to squeeze out a smile when he saw her. He was afraid that she might blow a pillow wind at young Master Lu's side. As for whether she really had intimate relations with young Master Lu, only the heavens knew. Who in the Prince of Jing'an's estate didn't know that young Master Lu was the #1 favorite of the young vassal king? Xing Hua, a man of sacrifice whose real name was Lu Lingbao, carefully pulled up the curtain. Lu Su walked out of the carriage and pushed the door to the private courtyard. Xing Hua could only wait outside the courtyard and did not dare to look at the courtyard door. There were 2 small courtyards. Originally, there were 2 begonia plants in the courtyard. However, begonia plants could not withstand the sunlight. The courtyard was dark and did not absorb the sunlight. One of them had already died. Lu Su went straight to the main room. Before he went up the stairs, he stopped. A woman who was guarding the door was frowning. When she saw Lu Su, she was first surprised and then happy. She quickly walked down the stairs and kept a good distance from him. She said respectfully and softly, "Greetings, young Master Su." Lu Xuan smiled lightly and bowed his head slightly. He did not lack etiquette. Although he disliked this woman of unknown origin and never hid it in front of the young lord, he would not make an enemy out of her if he had to deal with her. There was a sound of porcelain smashing on the ground. Lu Su looked up at the main room and frowned. Since Shenwu the Great stepped on the boat at the spring lake, the king of Jing'an returned to Xiangfan City in a daze. He had not shown up for many days. Many important political affairs that needed to be annotated by the lord were delayed. Although he was worthy of the title of the most intelligent person in the Jing'an palace, it had always been taboo for counselors to overstep their boundaries. The woman sighed and said, "Young Master Lu, please come in and persuade him. His Highness has only been drinking ever since he came back. He has eaten nothing." Lu Xuan nodded and walked up the stairs. The woman followed him closely. She was dignified but charming. She looked like the princess who died with the king of Jing'an. She gently pushed the door open for Lu Su. In the room, Zhao Sun's hair was disheveled. He was sitting in the corner with his back against the wall. Dozens of wine jugs were rolling around him. He smelled of wine and did not look like a lord at all. When he saw Lu Su, he felt guilty at first and then became angry. He picked up the wine jug with trembling fingers. The jug was empty. The young lord, who was almost as famous as his father in Xiangfan City, waited for a long time but did not get a drop of wine. He threw the wine jug and smashed the only remaining porcelain bottle on the shelf. Lu Xuan was blind but not blind. He was not surprised by Zhao Sun's depression. His Royal Highness had not experienced many twists and turns in his life. After he became the new king of Jing'an, his life was smooth. However, when he was on his way to the top, his dignity was trampled on by the enemy he hated the most. Lu Su did not comfort him. Instead, he turned around and took a new wine jug from the woman. He sat opposite Zhao Sun and handed it to the young lord, who only dared to hide and drown his sorrows in wine. When he heard the woman's footsteps and the sound of the door closing, he said slowly, Crown Prince Biyao is really the reincarnation of Jianghu Great Emperor. That is a good thing. Zhao Sun, whose eyes were cloudy, was stunned for a moment. Then he regained some clarity. He took the wine jug and stopped drinking. Instead, he stared at the true backbone of Xiang Fan. Lu Su said calmly, back then, the theory of yin-yang and 5 elements was popular in the Shangyin Academy. Huang Sanjia claimed that Liang, who had the fire element, was going to unify the world. The nemesis of fire was water. Biyao ruled the northwest and had the Wudang mountain which worshipped Jianghu Great Emperor. It was said that 800 years ago, Jianghu Great Emperor came to the world and became the emperor of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty originated from the southern border of Biyao. This was the reason why the imperial astronomer instigated the case of the white clothes in the capital. For the emperor who did not care about the common people and ghosts, he would rather believe in the change of the dynasty and the change of the 5 elements than not. The old lord is the adopted son of Wang Xianji of the emperor of War City. There was also the disturbance of Jianghu Great Emperor coming to the world at the Lake of Spring. I don't believe that the emperor can sit still. I believe that Wang Xianji can ignore the imperial edict, but I don't believe that Wang Xianji can resist the temptation of fighting with Jianghu Great Emperor. What other competition in the world could be more suitable than the battle with God Yujing, who had walked down from the celestial heavens, as the finale? The imperial court can tolerate His Royal Highness who has already gained power, but it will never accept a king of Biyao who has ambition and fate. Why don't you make a bet with me on whether Wang Xianji will leave the city in the near future? Zhao Sun's eyes lit up. He did not care about the disrespect in Lu Su's words towards the royal family. He clapped his hands and laughed, that makes sense. I won't bet, I'll definitely lose. Chapter 857. Lu Suan stood up and patted the dust off. He said to himself, a vassal king has been drinking for a few days. What a scandal. You are not afraid of being laughed at by Lu Su, but are you not afraid of being laughed at by women? I have only heard that men like to puff themselves up in front of the women they like, but I have never heard of a man pretending to be a coward in front of a woman. Zhao Sun smiled in relief, but he was still a bit embarrassed. Fortunately, the blind scholar could not see it. Zhao Sun put down the flagon and stood up abruptly. He straightened his messy clothes. Outside the house came a man's deep voice and suppressed coughing. Zhao Sun hurriedly opened the door. He did not even look at the face of the prince's mansion's men of sacrifice. He directly took a section of the secret letter that was secretly delivered to Jing and Palace by a carrier pigeon. After opening it, his face turned red and his handsome face was so excited that it was twisted. He read the few words of the secret letter several times before he clenched it tightly in his hand. He turned around and walked quickly to hug Lu Su. He laughed and said, Mr. Lu really can predict the future. He is not inferior to Huang Sanjia. He is out of the city. The woman standing far away in the courtyard secretly looked over and happened to see the handsome face of the blind man who seemed to have everything under control. She did not know why, but her intuition told her that Mr. Lu, who was smiling peacefully, was not smiling. In the Shen family square, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, smoke rose in spirals from kitchen chimneys and the sound of chickens and dogs. A Confucian in a green robe with white hair on his temples walked in. He looked elegant and graceful. When he was young, he must have been a handsome man who could make many women fall in love at first sight. He stood quietly under a row of lush feng shui trees at the entrance of the village, as if he was looking for someone. Huang Longsher walked out of the house and looked at each other. Huang Longsher hesitated for a moment but still walked toward the old man in green robe. They stood together at the entrance of the village. The curved river gurgled. The scholar in green robe chuckled and said, a few years ago, I secretly looked through the Shen family's genealogy records. Your handwriting is still the same as when you were studying at the Shangyin Academy. This time, I guessed that you would most likely appear here, so I came to try my luck. The corners of Huang Longsher's mouth twitched. How could I have disturbed you? The West Chu Empire is on the verge of being reinstated. There are so many things that you, Chao Changqing, have to personally attend to. Oh, I know. So it's old monster Wang who has left Martial Emperor's city and returned to the Jianghu. But since it was this old monster who was going to deal with that pitiful worm, even if you, Chao Zhangqing, were a saint, you still wouldn't be able to stop him. Unless Deng Te returns from the Eastern Sea, and if he is willing to join hands with you to resist the enemy. However, if you really anger Wang Xianji, no matter who he wants to kill, even the Heavenly King can't do anything about it. Even such a monster that appears only once every 500 years is qualified to fight with Ancestor Lu. Chao Changqing smiled and asked, if I join Luo Yang, we can't protect Su Fengnian? Huang Longsha shook his head and said, something happened over there. Song Nianqing used the Earth Fairy Sword. I thought his last 14th sword was at most a celestial phenomenon. I didn't expect him to have cramps. Master Lu Hao seized the opportunity and was very clever. Luo Yang was careless this time. If you want that kid to be safe, you can only hope that he won't have cramps like Song Nianqing and invite the Jianghu Great Emperor's Dharmakaya after the Spring God Lake. Otherwise, even if Wang Xianji's original intention was to give face to the Zhao family's son and go out of the city to put on a show, he might be itching for a good fight. But it's easy to invite a god but hard to send one away. Not to mention that this kind of fake immortal can't withstand Wang Xianji's full attack. Even if Wang Xianji let him go, he would still make that kid lose a layer of skin. From my point of view, it's possible that someone around him will die. Luo Yang? Su Longxiang? Or Su Shao? Chao Changqing sighed and said, why does it sound like Jianghu's reincarnation doesn't have any benefits? Huang Longsha sneered and said, it's a broken business that's destined to lose money. Look at that kid in the past 20 years. Who around him has it easy? If there's really such a thing as the reincarnation of a celestial being, then Jianghu's incarnation of the Great Qin dynasty 800 years ago was born. Now, not to mention Jianghu Great Emperor, even if the three old masters sitting in the Three Pristines Hall came down to the mortal world, they wouldn't be of any use. Because it's against the law of heaven, they would still be suppressed by the Zhao family. Only after 300 years and 14 years later, will. Chao Changqing smiled and asked, will what? Huang Longsha sneered and said, you'll know when you live for another 300 or 400 years. Chao Changqing smiled and said, no matter what happens in the next few hundred years, living in the world, there are many things in the present that we should do our best without going into a dead end. Then, in the end, we'll still have a clear conscience. For the first time, Huang Longsha asked someone else a question, what about the girl that Li Chungang likes? Chao Changqing joked, even you can't predict. Huang Longsha said indifferently, there are many people that I can't predict. Chao Changqing sighed and said, the Jianghu city's killer cat, the princess, and I were watching the battle. If it wasn't for the sword that went to the Jianghu city, there would be another sword that fell from the sky. Huang Longsha said, we're just a wild old man's words. As for the Jianghu, it's just a dying flash. Chao Changqing laughed it off. A tall and sturdy old man with a head full of white hair did not take the flat road. Instead, he chose to go deep into the mountains and forests where there were few people. He only slowed down slightly when he was near the city, but he was still far faster than a horse. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes stopped for the first time since he left the city in the Eastern Sea. A beautiful young woman pressed her hands on the hilt of an ancient sword that was inserted into the ground. She blocked the path of Wang Xianji from the Jianghu city. She only had the great Liang dragon sparrow. But she was facing the most powerful person in the world who had dominated the Jianghu for 60 years. Chapter 858. This chapter is a little late. The second chapter is before 12 o'clock. The third chapter is before dawn. The old man who had been in charge of the Martial Emperor's city for 80 years looked at the great Liang dragon sparrow from the sword tomb of the Wu family and nodded. Needless to say, with just this sword, he was qualified to challenge Wang Xianji's sword. Jiang and I bit her lips. She would be lying to herself if she said that she was not nervous at all. She could not be nice to old man Li, who was wearing a sheepskin coat, because the senior who taught her calligraphy but did not practice swordsmanship did not have the slightest arrogance. Instead, he looked like an old man who liked to boast. She was not afraid of Chao Zhangqing, because in her heart, Chao Guanzi had always been that uncle she had seen in the West Chu imperial palace waiting for the imperial order when she was young. He was kind and amiable. She did not think much of Chao Guanzi's so-called outstanding martial cultivation of the eight-dipper celestial phenomenon. But Wang Xianji was different. Even in the beautiful cage in the bitter cold Biyao, she had heard of how the old man with the surname Wang suppressed all the heroes in the world. He claimed to be the second in the world, and no one dared to claim to be the first in the world to mock the whole Jianghu. He broke the wooden horse and ox, defeated Dong Tai, defeated Chao Chongqing, defeated Gu Jiantang. All the masters of Liang who were on the wushu list had lost to this old man who never left the city. Old man Wang became a whetstone for the whole martial arts. How sharp the others were, they had to go to East Sea and Martial Emperor City to be sharpened to convince the masses. Countless Jianghu talents dreamed of fighting with old man Wang. Even if they lost in one move, they would be proud of it. The scariest part was that in the 100 years that Wang Xianji was in, the pugilistic world was filled with layers upon layers of mountains and giant peaks confronting each other. Various pugilistic world geniuses were born in large numbers and could be said to be endless. It was far from what the previous 100 years of pugilistic world could compare to. However, Wang Xianji was still unshakable and left the world behind. It was widely acknowledged that only the demon-slaying platform from 60 years ago, Qi Xuanzhen, could be compared to him. Unfortunately, after Qi Xuanzhen, another immortal from Taoism, Hong Shixiang, had just entered the pugilistic world and left. Therefore, Wang Xianji was still worthy of being called invincible in the world. Even Li Chungang, who had extremely high standards, admitted that even if he re-entered the realm of Sword Immortal, he would still be no match for the old monster Wang. Jiang and I hesitated and said, "Castellan Wang, Uncle Chao said that you are going to kill Su Fengnian." Wang Xianji's voice was loud and clear. He said calmly, "This old man had an oath with the late emperor of Liang. In this old man's lifetime, no matter if the king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, succeeded in seizing the throne or not, I have to ensure that this adopted son and his lineage will be rich and prosperous. Zhao Heng's death has a lot to do with Biyao. However, this old man is not so despicable to get entangled with a junior. Otherwise, when the crown prince of Biyao, Su Fengnian, carried a bowl and ascended the building, even if Dong Tai personally escorted him, it would not be so easy. This time, this old man left the city because he heard that Su Fengnian invited the Dharma image of the great emperor of Jianghu at the Spring God Lake. Furthermore, a reclusive old celestial being from the Daoist sect came out of his body and brought a secret decree to Martial Emperor City. This old man has never had the chance to fight with Qi Xianzhu in his entire life. Coincidentally, he wanted to take this opportunity to witness the magnificence of a celestial being. Jiang and I wanted to say something but stopped. Wang Xianji smiled faintly and said with a pleasant expression, "This old man knows that your real name is Jiang Si. You are the princess of the fallen West Chu. You carry the great fortune from the great Qin dynasty to the West Chu. Your body's foundation is also excellent. Li Chungang is guiding you in the way of the sword, and Chao Chongqing is sparing no effort to help you maintain your realm. That is why there is such a magnificent scene of a woman riding a flying sword today. To the Jianghu, it is not easy. This old man has been overseeing the Martial Emperor City for many years. Other than those who have no attachments and want to die, he has never destroyed a good talent in the Jianghu. The reason why Chao Chongqing dared to let you block the way alone is presumably because he is sure that this old man will not make things difficult for you. This old man might as well be frank. The reason why I, Wang Xianji, am able to achieve what I have today is largely because Li Chungang did not hesitate to ruin his reputation and allowed me to break his sword, the wooden horse, and the ox. Furthermore, this old man entered the Jianghu because he was envious of Li Chunggang's famous sword. Jiang Si, since you are his disciple, this old man will not take the initiative to harm your life and destroy your realm. You can rest assured about this. However, how can this old man not see that your realm is unstable? Before you truly enter the land immortal realm, every time you use the earth immortal sword, it is a desperate move that will reduce your lifespan. Therefore, this old man would like to advise you. Since you know that you can't stop me, don't easily fight because of your personal feelings. This old man has watched the Jianghu in the Eastern Sea for more than 80 years, but only one female sword immortal, Wuxia, appeared. I really don't want you to die halfway. Jiang Si shook his head. Wang Xinji smiled. This old man has never forced people to do things against their will. The reason why he said so much is mostly because of your relationship with Li Chungang. If you retreat without using a sword, you will definitely not be satisfied. It will also be detrimental to your sword heart. Jiang Si said seriously, I have 2 swords. Wang Xinji laughed heartily. There was actually someone in this world who dared to bargain with him. He said in a clear voice, 2 swords is fine. Let this old man see if the disciple of Li Chungang and Chao Zhangqing will disappoint with the addition of the great Liang dragon sparrow. Jiang Si said methodically, this year, Uncle Chao secretly took me to the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. I climbed up the Wu family's sword mountain filled with famous swords and also saw the deep pool with hundreds of thousands of ancient swords. Wang Xinji was very experienced. After thinking for a while, he said, it is the superior sword way of seeing thousands of swords and then recognizing them. Chao Guanzi's spirit has always been rare. The sword way he taught you is naturally not ordinary. Jiang Si shook his head and said, at first, Uncle Chao had this intention. But I accidentally affected the qi in 2 places. Then, I accidentally changed to a different sword way. But it is only a prototype now. Uncle Chao said that this move will become stronger when facing a strong opponent. If the opponent is not City Lord Wang, but an ordinary person, it will not be so powerful. Chapter 859. Wang Xinji smiled and said, little girl, you don't have to explain to this old man so clearly. This old man can't wait for someone to seriously injure this old man. When Wang Xinji said this, there wasn't the slightest bit of pretentious arrogance, because this was the principle of heaven and earth. Jiang and I blushed slightly and nodded. Jiang and I slowly closed her eyes. Her hands that were pressing on the hilt of the great Liang dragon sparrow sword floated up a few inches, and the famous sword was unsheathed. Wang Xinji looked up at the sky, nodded, and praised, interesting. Jiang and I, who had just raised her hands, suddenly pressed down, and the great Liang dragon sparrow returned to the scabbard. She lightly shouted, place your piece. Place a piece on the chessboard? Where was the chessboard? What was the piece that was going to be placed on the chessboard? The majestic old man's expression remained calm, but a strange light flashed in his eyes. He had actually underestimated this girl. In his eyes, the first move of unsheathing the sword and returning it to the scabbard could be considered a small matter, but what happened next had some great significance. The clear sky was instantly cut into countless crisscrossing ravines. Sword chi. Thousands of sharp sword chi raged in the sky. 2 mighty waves of sword chi, one from the Wu family sword tomb, the other from the Dongyue sword pool, like a black and white double line drawing a chessboard. With the sword chi as the line, with the sky as the chessboard, what a big move. Wang Xinji instantly understood the subtlety of it. The little girl was right when she said that one would become stronger when facing a strong opponent. It was because the opponent was Wang Xinji that the waves of sword chi from the sword tomb and sword pool came so quickly and densely. Wang Xinji's smile deepened. She was really an honest and adorable girl, no wonder Li Chungang valued her so much. When Jiang and I uttered the 2 words, the sword chi in the sky was like a torrential downpour, falling down in unison. Furthermore, the falling was not without order, but all the sword chi was pointed at Wang Xinji, so much so that it seemed like a majestic tornado on land. Wang Xinji did not move, allowing the sword chi to pour down from above his head. However, the sword chi, without exception, was stirred up dozens of feet above his head. When the last sword chi dissipated, it was only 3 feet away from Wang Xinji's head. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes did not move at all. Just like that, he withstood all the ancient sword chis that came from thousands of miles away with only the vigorous gang chi that flowed out of his body. Wang Xinji looked at the pale-faced young woman and said calmly, indeed, it is still in its infancy. This old man is looking forward to the scene of you attracting 2 real sword mountains like a swarm of locusts. Wang Xinji sighed in her heart. This woman actually had the aura of becoming the master of all the famous swords in the world. How many years had it been since he felt that the younger generation would surpass him? Wang Xinji said solemnly, Jiangxi, this old man is very curious about your second sword. Su Fengnian's phoenix eyes, which were originally slightly feminine, turned into a strange golden color. His entire person seemed to have the aura of a monarch. He reached out his hand and grabbed Luo Yang, whose body and soul were unstable. He chuckled and said, as long as I don't die and I don't let you go, where can you go? 800 years ago, the necromancer who went to the sea to visit the immortals had already asked for an elixir of immortality. However, you secretly destroyed it. Do you think I don't know? I just don't want to argue with you. After saying that, Su Fengnian ignored the astonished Luo Yang. He turned his head and shook his head at the otherworldly item in the red robe on the wall. The otherworldly item instantly quieted down. Su Fengnian pressed his forehead with one hand and closed his eyes. Then, he opened them again and cleared his mind. He smiled and said something contradictory, I'm really me. Everything comes from the same origin. I can't escape from the fate of being alone. After the time it takes to burn an incense stick, will I still be me? Will you still be you? He pulled Luo Yang, who was crying and laughing unknowingly, and carried her on his back. Then, he strode forward and chased after Lu Hao, who had fled when he saw that the situation was not good. After a few blinks of an eye, he caught up with the guard dog of the Zhao family, who was said to have been at Celestial Phenomenon for 50 years. Su Fengnian almost ran side by side with him. He smiled and said, Lu Hao, you were very impressive when you asked 3 questions just now. Lu Hao instantly drifted more than 30 meters away. He shouted in horror and anger, who are you? The golden eyes of Su Fengnian slightly narrowed his eyes and smiled. The capital of the small country where ancestor Lu lives has been shot into a hedgehog by Great Qin's crossbows. If Great Qin's elite soldiers don't die, they will destroy you all. Lu Hao was so angry that he laughed. Su Fengnian, are you crazy? The reason why people in Jianghu were polite to those monks and nuns was because they were afraid of their strange hands. It was the same reason why swordsmen were afraid of encountering a new sword. Unless one was an expert in martial arts, no one dared to say that they would not fail miserably at such an easy task. Lu Hao had guarded the imperial palace for 60 years and read all the martial arts manuals. It was not wrong to say that he was a frog in a well, but the well itself was almost as wide as heaven and earth. Lu Hao had seen too many amazing moves. He did not dare to be arrogant just because he had stayed at Celestial Phenomenon for a few decades. That year, when the young leader of Wudong entered and left Great Peace City as if there was no one there, he and Han Diaoxi quietly watched from afar. After weighing the pros and cons, they did not even have the desire to make a move. This year, Mount Longhu had another Zhao Ningxian, who was said to be the reincarnation of the first ancestor. However, Lu Hao's cautious nature did not mean that this old celestial phenomenon expert was a pushover. Killing a first-rank expert who was unwilling to fight to the death had always been as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Lu Hao returned empty-handed because he felt embarrassed. He felt that Su Fengnian was very familiar with unorthodox methods and was not easy to deal with. Su Fengnian was like a maggot in a corpse. He did not let Lu Hao pull away and asked with a smile, it is said that the strong are bold. Why are you, a celestial phenomenon expert, so cowardly? The sky above them was originally blue and cloudless. First, there were clouds, then dark clouds. Lu Hao did not say anything as he flew. Su Fengnian glanced at the sky and stopped. Lu Hao, who was like a stray dog, also stopped. His face was gloomy. I heard that there is a sword formation called the Thunder Pool, but how can it compare to a real Thunder Pool? To deal with an otherworldly item like you, it is very effective. Chapter 860. There is one more chapter before dawn. There is no need to wait for more. I have a pot of wine made in Jianghu. I have a palm that can support the 5 mountains. I have a mouthful that can eat the spring and autumn. Hundreds of years ago, a Jianghu elder set the rule of the first rank 4 realms. He used these 3 sentences to praise the celestial phenomenon realm. He said that once a celestial phenomenon realm expert could resonate with the heavens and earth, they would be able to look down on the world with disdain. Lu Haoshi looked at the sky and his smile deepened. In order to become famous in Jianghu, as long as one was a Jianghu disciple, they would have a few hidden skills. For example, Song Nianqing had brought 14 swords and 14 moves on this trip. Lu Haoshi was no exception. This lightning pool was originally intended to be a big gift, waiting for the next time Chao Zhangqing, who had transcended mortality and entered holiness, came to the capital. Chao Guanzi's 3 visits to the imperial palace were like passing through corridors, slapping him in the face each time. How could Lu Hao swallow this resentment? He never thought that he would use it on that kid first. The black clouds were like ink. Lu Haoshi quietly waited for the thunder to roll. Lu Haoshi had seen many smart people who relied on shortcuts to the south to win the favor of the emperor. They were very skilled at fishing for fame. Prime Minister Zhao Danping of Qingci was one of them. But in Great Peace City, Lu Haoshi had served 3 generations of emperors of Liang. He had always been the mainstay of that capital. Even Zhao Danping could not share the incense and friendship that Lu Haoshi had accumulated for the Zhao family. Lu Haoshi was used to using his cultivation to crush his opponents. This time, he carried the imperial order to kill Su Fengnian. He and Song Nianqing only had the first move. If they did not succeed and Su Fengnian escaped, they still had a backup plan. Therefore, Lu Haoshi had no interest in fighting for his life. But even a clay Buddha had anger. Moreover, Lu Haoshi and Biyao were in a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. This Su Fengnian exuded an evil aura from head to toe. Lu Haoshi had the idea of finding out what was going on. Su Fengnian, who is still carrying Luo Yang on his back, is calm and unruffled, waiting for the heavenly tribulation to land. He only had 30 minutes. If Lu Haoshi insisted on avoiding the battle, Meng Qi did not have much confidence in capturing the old fox's Achilles heel. Celestial phenomenon experts were favored by the heavens and earth, and it was extremely difficult to capture their flow of qi. If Lu Haoshi wanted to escape, he would not be able to escape the heavenly net because he was not an earth immortal who could attract the divine tribulation. He was like the fish that escaped the net. Even if Su Fengnian could catch up with Lu Haoshi, he could not afford to waste time. However, there is no such thing as an invulnerable move in the world. As long as Lu Haoshi is arrogant and has the courage to take root, Su Fengnian does not mind enduring the so-called rolling thunder in the pond, and then wait for an opportunity to make his move. The black clouds in the sky suddenly fell and floated on the ground. It was like a mysterious painting of the world changing, giving people a feeling of the vicissitudes of life. Su Fengnian's upper body is exposed from the clouds. The waist-high black clouds are rolling and turbulent. Lightning flashes and thunder rumbles in the surrounding clouds, and the lightning gradually intertwines into a net. Su Fengnian walks slowly, and immediately becomes the fish that is targeted by the fisherman casting the net. In the blink of an eye, purple thunder floats in the sea of clouds. At a glance, there are no less than 50 of them. They are of different sizes, as big as the mouth of a well, and as small as a fist. Between the purple thunder, there is a constantly jumping snow-white lightning connecting them. It really is a lightning pool not only in name but also in reality. Su Fengnian, who did not stop walking, is extremely daring. He reaches out and grabs a purple thunder, and the entire lightning pool flips over. More than 50 purple thunders suddenly fly over. Su Fengnian's right hand hooks into the purple thunder, and purple gas lingers around his arm. His left hand is not idle either, lightly waving it, and every time, it will hit a purple thunder that smashes towards him. However, this lightning pool is very domineering, and with Su Fengnian holding the purple thunder tightly, it does not weaken at all. This shocking and magnificent scene is not damaged at all. More than 50 purple thunder flew back, and after being hit, it bounces back about 20 zhang before rapidly spinning back. Their momentum is fierce, and their speed did not decrease, instead increasing. Su Fengnian, who is walking slowly, seems to be trapped in a moving lightning pool. The woman behind him uses her chin to touch his shoulder. Su Fengnian said softly, I remember that I promised to accompany you to the peak of Mount Kunlun to see the Sea of Clouds, but after a few rounds of hunting, I either forgot or missed it. Later on, when I made up my mind, you were already unwilling. Today, just treat it as making up for it. She said softly, compared to the smoke of the whole country that you gave to that vixen, the Sea of Clouds is nothing. Su Fengnian tilted his head and gently stroked her cheek. Taking a deep breath, he placed the purple thunder in his hand that has not been released into his mouth, and swallowed it into his stomach. He laughed and said, back then, the whole world was eaten by me, a few small sky thunders are nothing. Su Fengnian held a purple thunder in each hand and placed them into his mouth. When he had swallowed half of the purple thunder, the Sea of Clouds dissipated, and the thunder pool also disappeared. Lu Haosher, who was standing 300 feet away, was dumbfounded. He did not expect that this guy would use such a barbaric method to break the secret art of astronomical phenomena that he painstakingly created. 50 sky thunders that were painstakingly formed with the help of the heavens and earth. The Qi cultivators of Fu Long of the North sect had poured in a lot of effort to create them, and the cultivation base of a few great grandmasters had been directly squeezed dry. How could Lu Haosher not feel distressed when he lost half of his originally strong foundation? What was even more hateful was that evil horned centipede, whose cultivation base had inexplicably skyrocketed, even let out a comfortable burp. He gave Lu Haosher a sarcastic smile and asked lazily, why aren't you running? Lu Haosher quickly and neatly began to retreat. No wonder you haven't become an earth immortal after 50 years. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and sneered, if you didn't stop just now, I might not be able to do anything to you. But now, it's too late. Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and cut a thin blood groove between his eyebrows. Lu Haosher, who was fleeing in a hurry, suddenly felt as if his head had been split open. A shocking crack appeared from his forehead from top to bottom. His face was covered in blood and he looked battered and exhausted. But this was not the most terrifying thing that made Lu Haosher tremble with fear. As the blood continued to flow from his face, his celestial cultivation base was like a flood that broke through a dam. Lu Haosher could clearly feel the depth of his cultivation base. It was originally like a lake that could only watch helplessly as the lake water dried up, completely unable to stop the lake's level from dropping. While Lu Haosher was feeling bitter and hateful, he also found it inconceivable. The essence of the celestial cultivation base was to live freely with the heavens and earth. It was the precursor to becoming an earth immortal and transcending the mortal world. How could one be trapped by one's own cocoon? Could it be that this guy had achieved the same level as the heavens and earth? Could it be that he could forcibly absorb the fate of others and create his own world? If it was Hong Shixiang who had cut down the fate of the 6 nations, Lu Haosher would still be somewhat skeptical. But even if the kid behind him had inherited Luo Yang's cultivation base, it was absolutely impossible for him to be so terrifying. Lu Haosher was almost possessed by the devil. He gritted his teeth and took advantage of the situation to shatter his celestial cultivation base that was already on the verge of collapse. The moment before he fell into the Xian finger realm, he cut off his tail like a gecko and allowed the remaining half of the purple lightning to roll down. Like an earth immortal, he flew hundreds of feet away from the lunatic who had defeated him. Su Fengnian stopped and sighed in his heart. If only Lu Haosher had hesitated a little, and a little bit later, he was confident that he could have killed this old dog. He looked up at the sky and sneered. Li Yang's Zhao Shi was indeed the current orthodox ruler. Even a lackey who guarded the Zhao Shi's courtyard had a considerable amount of fate. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at the dense sword energy 10 miles away. It was a grand formation. Su Fengnian silently put the purple lightning into his sleeve and melted it into his qi. Luo Yang struggled to land on the ground and said calmly, you go. Su Fengnian held her hand and turned to look at her. She said sadly and resolutely, you want the world, I only want you. I can't monopolize it, I'd rather not. It's been like this for 800 years, and it's still the same after 800 years. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed. Is Qin Empresses that great? Luo Yang looked shocked and took a step back. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I'm him, he's not me. Luo Yang's expression was complicated. Su Fengnian squatted down and gestured for her to get on his back. He said softly, Luoyang, before returning to Baoyang, let's go to Luoyang City and have a look. Luoyang kicked his butt hard. Su Fengnian, who fell flat on his face, continued squatting and said softly, back then, the great Qin iron cavalry couldn't flatten the desert called Beimang. In this life, we'll make up for it. Tuoba dared to bully my woman, I. Without waiting for Su Fengnian to finish, Luoyang gently lay on his back. Su Fengnian stood up. I'll deal with you later. Luoyang said, beat Wang Xianji first. Chapter 861. It was a little late, but he didn't owe her anything. East Sea Martial Emperor City. There was a sword hovering outside the city. It had been there for a long time, so much so that the Jianghu people who were initially shocked by the sight of the 1,000 miles flying sword gradually lost their patience and interest. Some of the bored Jianghu people decided to find some entertainment by gambling on how long the sword would stay there. Those who bet early lost a lot of money. Some people in the city said that the flying sword was a challenge from the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, and that he would soon ride a donkey into the city. Some people said that it was a sword newly comprehended by Dongyue's sword pool's Song Nianqing. Some people swore that the old ancestor of the Wu clan's sword tomb was coming out of seclusion and was going to clear the name of the Wu clan's withered sword. Those who came to watch the show were waiting for the word trouble. But since the sword didn't cause any trouble, they were used to the sword stopping outside the city. Only some naughty children born and raised in the martial emperor city would climb up the outer city wall from time to time and shoot the sword with their slingshots. During this period, there was a sword-wielding wanderer who wanted to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He stood on the sword and performed many lame sword moves. In the end, he was met with countless disdainful looks. He also felt embarrassed and resentfully jumped down and left the city. Almost no one noticed that an old man with snow-white eyebrows had arrived in the city. After he entered the city, he lived in seclusion and only occasionally went to the wall filled with the world's weapons. After looking at them for a while, he quietly returned. Every day, a famous sword would disappear without a trace. It was just that there were too many famous swords and sharp weapons on the wall. For example, Song Nianqing had brought 12 swords to challenge Wang Xianji. Except for the 6 swords that were shattered, the other 6 swords were stuck on the wall according to the old rules of the martial emperor city. They had been there for many years, and one of them had quietly disappeared yesterday. The one-armed old man with eyebrows that reached his knees came to the wall alone again. He looked at an ownerless sword that was higher up on the wall and smacked his lips. He seemed to be greedy. Others were greedy for beauty, food, and wine, but he seemed to be exceptionally unique. Most of the weapons on the wall were famed swords, and they took up almost half of the wall. This was not strange, as the sword forest had always been flourishing in the martial arts world. The old man stretched out 2 fingers and pinched a strand of his snow-white long eyebrows. Just as he was making up his mind to eat the new sword that he had taken a fancy to tonight, he exclaimed in surprise and turned his head to look. A Taoist priest with a sword on his back happened to be looking at him. The long-browed old man asked, "Little Taoist of Mount Longhu, why is the relic of ancestor Lu, which should be hanging on Wudang's big gung horn, with you?" The young Taoist in a plain and ordinary Taoist robe asked, "Senior, why did you enter the city and stop your sword outside?" The old man smiled and said, "This old man's last sword strike in this life is to strive for perfection, so that I can ask the strongest martial artist in the past 100 years. Originally, it was almost time to enter the city, but the one surnamed Wang unexpectedly left the city for the first time, leaving this old man hanging on the side. No matter, we can just wait for him to return to the city." "You are?" The Taoist priest replied calmly, "I am Qi Xianxia of Mount Longhu." The old man made an "oh" sound. "I've heard of it. There is a saying in Jianghu about little ancestor Lu." Qi Xianxia, who had been traveling Jianghu since leaving Wudang, asked, "Is Lord Wang going to stop a useless monk from the western regions? May I ask who senior is?" The old man smiled and said, "What useless monk? It's Lu Songtao of Mount Zhulu. As for this old man's name, it doesn't matter. You only need to know that there is still a sword in this world that can make Wang Xianji the real second in the world." Qi Xianxia smiled gently. The old man's fingers loosened his long eyebrows and said, "Although you are a Taoist, you are also a swordsman. If this old man loses in the future, you will follow his next sword strike. It doesn't matter 10 or 20 years later, as long as it is not too long, until Wang Xianji ascends." Qi Xianxia bowed slightly and then turned to leave. Lu Hao had never been so flustered before, like a drowning dog. 50 years of celestial phenomenon knowledge, in less than half an incense's time, disappeared like smoke. After confirming that the fellow wasn't chasing him, he still ran a dozen miles before stopping. He had never thought that there would be a day where he would be frightened by the mere twang of a bow. Advancing in the martial path was harder the further one went. Rank 3 to rank 2 was a huge threshold. Most of the disciples of rich families who had secret manuals and pills were stopped at this threshold. Cultivating martial arts was an extremely tough profession. It required talent as a foundation and also perseverance. After reaching rank 2 and becoming a master, one would immediately meet an even higher threshold. It was so high that many geniuses who didn't have enough perseverance would back off. Lu Hao had seen too many young people with natural advantages who couldn't enter the door and wasted their lives, not to mention rank 1 to rank 4. It was because he knew that the road was difficult that Lu Hao, who was about to reach the peak, was heartbroken over his drop in rank. Lu Hao, who was filled with hatred, sat down on the ground. His hands stabbed into the ground and his fingers formed a hook, drawing a mud ditch. Lu Hao's emotions slowly calmed down. He took out a small sandalwood box from his sleeve and carefully opened it. After opening the box, a small pill was revealed. It didn't have any fragrance, instead, it smelled bad. However, Lu Hao solemnly stretched out 2 fingers and tried to pinch the pill. This inconspicuous bait was rumored to be half a celestial medicine recipe obtained by the Qin dynasty's emperor when he went out to sea to visit immortals. There was a secret saying in the Taoist scriptures, "If you don't accept the bait, stay in the human world and become an immortal." It meant that if one could obtain this pill, they would be able to ascend. Of course, Lu Hao knew that the pill in the box didn't have such effects. However, it could help him stabilize his current rank and fight for a chance to return to celestial phenomenon. Lu Hao suddenly retracted his fingers and closed the box. He stood up and looked around. He was still worried, so he circled around and made sure that there was no one within 2 miles. Then he sat down cross-legged and swallowed the bait. He closed his eyes and focused. Gradually, he entered the state of a dragon in the abyss. Ha! The 2 soft words suddenly rang in Lu Hao's ears like a real clap of thunder. Wang Xianji didn't do anything in a hurry and was very slow. However, there were too many smart people in Jianghu and there were too many shortcuts. In the end, Wang Xianji, who was down to earth, became an anomaly. After he entered the martial emperor's city, his cultivation had been steadily rising. He was not the youngest second-level master at that time, nor was he like Li Chungang, who broke through the next level a few years after reaching the first level. Wang Xianji had never had a stunning breakthrough. Compared to the martial arts geniuses who were chasing after the 4 grandmasters, Wang Xianji could only be regarded as a late bloomer. However, after he achieved the diamond body, Wang Xianji gradually became invincible among those in the same realm. Moreover, no one had thought that this tall young man who was only fit to watch the battle at that time would become a late bloomer. Especially when he broke the wooden horse ox with his bare hands, it made Wang Xianji truly reach the top of Jianghu. Since then, Wang Xianji had never tasted defeat until he was habitually called Old Monster Wang. This taciturn old man stood alone on the top of the martial emperor's city tower, coldly overlooking Jianghu. Dong Tai, who rode a donkey and carried a peach branch, proudly climbed up the tower and went down after losing. Qiao Chongqing, who made the son of the Zhao family restless, also went down after losing. In the end, very few people wanted to defeat this old monster. They just wanted to climb up the tower quickly and be content. If they were lucky enough to meet this old man and ask for some martial arts experience, it would undoubtedly be a pleasant surprise. Wang Xianji didn't like this kind of Jianghu. The martial emperor's city lord, who was waiting for the little girl's second sword, raised his eyebrows, not knowing whether he was surprised or angry. Her sword strike caused a ripple to appear in Wang Xianji's tranquil state of mind. The sword opened the gate of heaven. The scene of the gate of heaven opening was splendid. A pillar of the gate of heaven fell to the ground. When the other pillar was erected, the gate of heaven was opened. Jianghu, who was holding the sword with her hands folded, was pale. She pushed the great Liang dragon sparrow into the ground inch by inch. In order to stop Wang Xianji from moving forward, this woman actually opened the gate of heaven by force. Obviously, the gate of heaven was opened for Wang Xianji. It was obvious that she wanted to take the initiative to send this invincible martial emperor city lord on his way. Blood seeped out of the corner of Jianghu's mouth. She continued to push the long sword into the ground, desperately trying to pull the other gate of heaven down. Only a few people in the world knew the truth. She was just a woman who was in so much pain when she moved books up the mountain that she thought she would die. She was just a timid woman who was afraid of hardship and did not dare to practice her sword. She was just a woman who was satisfied with earning some copper coins from reading books. She had never thought about riding a sword, reviving her country, or opening the gate of heaven with a sword. Such an unattainable thing, she never thought that she could do it. She just wanted to secretly stab him to death one day when he was not paying attention. Then, her life would be over. Wang Xianji still did not stop her sword from opening the gate of heaven. I, Wang Xianji, don't want to go through the gate of heaven. So what if the gate of heaven is opened? At this moment, Wang Xianji suddenly slid back and made a defensive posture. A figure broke through the gate of heaven and punched towards Wang Xianji. Wang Xianji slid back a full 300 feet. The second gate of heaven was about to support the gate of heaven and earth when it disappeared. Jianghu did not even have time to spit out a mouthful of blood. She looked at the figure in a daze. The figure flashed and pounced towards Wang Xianji. It was another simple punch. Although Wang Xianji did not fall, she was fiercely pushed back 700 feet. No one in the world could make Wang Xianji, who could kill immortals, retreat 10,000 feet. Chapter 862. A gentle breeze blew past. Dust drifted in the straight line where Wang Xianji had retreated. Some of the slightly taller mounds of earth were directly smashed apart by the old man's back. Fortunately, the two parties were fighting in the wilderness, so no outsiders saw this shocking scene. Wang Xianji shook his ankles and simply kicked off the pair of tattered hemp shoes. His sleeves were also torn apart by him, revealing his thick bronze arms. His muscles were as hard as boulders and contained the power to split mountains and split cities. Martial Emperor City was built near the water and looked at the sea. Every year during the summer and autumn, there would be surging white waves. The waves would drag across 1,000 miles and hit the eastern city wall. 30 years ago, Wang Xianji would stand proudly on the eastern city wall every time there was a tornado on the sea. He would use his arms to hit the waves. In the past 30 years, two people had replaced him to hit the waves, but their momentum was not as great as Wang Xianji's. Martial arts had always been despised by the people of the three sects as they viewed it as an inferior technique that did not conform to the way of heaven. It was Wang Xianji who turned the tide with his own strength and changed the views of the people. Especially when Tuoba Bodhisattva and Shenyuan Pan achieved success and fame one after another, it made Wang Xianji, the pioneer of martial arts, like the sun in the sky, never to fall behind. Wang Xianji's expression was calm. He looked at the distance under his feet. His chi flowed and surged. His body was like the sea. In terms of internal energy, among the top 10 in the Wushu ranking, Chao Chongqing was even more outstanding than Deng Tai, who was ranked third in the world. He was right behind Tuoba Bodhisattva, but he claimed that he could not compare to Wang Xianji. In terms of combat power, the green shirt sword god 60 years ago and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat were on par. However, Wang Xianji was much stronger than him 60 years ago. This was also why in the Battle of the Eastern Sea, even when facing Li Chungang who had returned to the peak of swordsmanship, Wang Xianji only used 90% of his strength. In the 500 years of Jianghu, there were only 6 or 7 people who were recognized as the world's number one. In the recent 100 years, Wang Xianji was finally the one who took the throne. This old man who claimed to be the world's number 2 was undoubtedly more ferocious and invincible than the demon of Zhulu Mountain, Lu Songtao 100 years ago. Back then, Qi Xuanzhen, who was 60 years old but had a youthful face, stood on the evil-slaying platform and looked down at the world. He guarded the door for the heavenly Tao, so no demons and monsters could cause trouble in the world. With the old and strong Wang Xianji as the stabilizing force in Jianghu, there was no martial artist who could stand out. Therefore, how could a new tree stand out in the Wulin world? 80 years had passed, and the 4 great grandmasters had become the top 10 martial arts appraisers that were held once every 10 years. The experts had changed again and again. No one knew what this old monster was thinking. Wang Xianji's lips curled into a hearty smile. It was finally here. The old man, who was more than 100 years old, bent his knees slightly, spread out his left hand and slowly stretched it forward. His right shoulder was tilted low, and his right hand was clenched into a fist. That uninvited guest had given Wang Xianji a gift with 2 punches, and he had sent Wang Xianji a full 1,000 feet away. There was absolutely no reason for Wang Xianji not to return the favor. The old man in coarse hemp clothes made this simple and unremarkable gesture. There was no concept of wind and clouds in the world that resonated with it, nor was there any majestic scene of flying sand and rolling stones in the surroundings. Wang Xianji withdrew his gaze and gently exhaled. His eardrums vibrated violently. After the 2 punches, the person who had passed through the divine gate did not pursue an attack. He only paused slightly 7,000 feet away, waiting for Wang Xianji to stabilize his body before he began his 3rd attack. Step by step, he left a footprint, but he did not step on the ground. Instead, he walked in the air, like a string of water ripples made by a stone. He was several feet above the ground, forming circles of airflow ripples. Every step he took was like a great bell striking Wang Xianji's heart. Not only did Wang Xianji's eardrums vibrate more and more, even his temples began to sink and protrude. Wang Xianji still did not show any signs of punching. He waited until the person took the last leap, crossing 1,000 feet in one step, and stepped heavily on the ground. He had accumulated his strength to the extreme and punched. Wang Xianji's eardrums and temples suddenly stopped moving at the same time. Only then did he punch out. The 2 fists collided. There was a loud bang. Between the 2 fists, a lake surface, spread out by the majestic Qi Ji, appeared horizontally. This thin lake surface was ferocious and distorted, and the earth-shaking sound spread through the wilderness. A few winter sparrows circled low in the air and inadvertently hit this wall of Qi. They were immediately torn and shattered beyond recognition. Wang Xianji's face, which did not show any signs of aging, wrinkled like the lake water. Layers of subtle undulations appeared on his face, and then slowly returned to normal. The arms of the 2 who had punched out swung back at the same time. Then, they changed hands and punched at the same time. It was almost another winter thunder that shook the plains. Wang Xianji smiled slightly and gently withdrew his hand. The person shook his arm and did not pester endlessly. Neither of them moved, but the distance between them was increasing. A trench was torn open in the ground, its width and length gradually rising. Wang Xianji slowly asked, "Should I call you the Prince of Biyao or the Great Emperor Jianghu?" A young man with a pair of sparkling golden eyes smiled and said, "Su Fengnian is fine." Wang Xianji looked at the strange eyes of the young man that were gradually dimming. His Qi Ji floated behind him like a long rainbow. The old man said with some regret, "So it's only for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. I don't even know who set the rules. Boring." Su Fengnian mocked, "If you want to be interesting, why don't you go to the heavens and find a deity to fight?" Wang Xianji smiled and said, "Decaying grass becomes fireflies. Even if there really is a deity who ascends to the heavens, he may not be a good person." Su Fengnian asked, "Do you want to lose a fight in the human world so that you can willingly cross the heavenly gate?" Wang Xianji shook his head and said clearly, "Born as a human, dead as a ghost, this is the most realistic truth. As for whether deities are deities or not, in this old man's eyes, they are nothing more than thieves who are greedy for life and afraid of death. Those who steal a hook will be punished, those who steal a country will be marquis, those who steal life will be deities. Therefore, this old man is only willing to believe half of the talk about ghosts and deities. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this nonsense. It's very easy for you to kill me now. What do you say?" Wang Xianji smiled and asked, "Do you have a chance to recover your previous state?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "It's difficult." Wang Xianji nodded and said, "As long as there is, this old man will wait for you in the Eastern Sea next time." Su Fengnian saw that the old man was about to turn around and asked, "You didn't fight with Sui Xiagu?" Wang Xianji still turned around and left. Su Fengnian swallowed a mouthful of blood and staggered back. At the heavenly gate, Jiang and I pulled out the great Liang dragon finch with a hesitant expression. Not far from her, the white-robed Luo Yang squatted on the ground and grabbed a handful of soil, looking into the distance. Jiang and I raised her hand and controlled the red sandalwood sword box. She placed the great Liang dragon finch on her back. Luo Yang stood up and clapped her hands. She turned around and looked at the woman who had really overturned the country 800 years ago. She sneered and said, "You're still the same kind of skin that makes men feel pity for you. But compared to the past, you have more heart and lungs now." Jiang and I was confused by her words. She had a natural dislike for this white-robed woman. She immediately glared and said, "Why do you care?" Luo Yang raised his hand inexplicably and made a gesture to raise his glass and drink it in one gulp. He laughed and then asked, "Are you thirsty?" Jiang and I did not want to lower herself to the same level as this crazy woman. She caught a glimpse of the approaching figure from the corner of her eyes. She bit her lips and turned around resolutely. Su Fengnian stopped and closed his eyes. That year, the woman named Jianghu, who was chosen as a tribute and sent into the palace, timidly walked on the path behind him and the Empress of Great Qin. She had yet to drink that cup of poisoned wine. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and rubbed his face. He continued to walk until he reached Luo Yang's side. Lu Haoshi, who Su Fengnian had mistakenly thought would escape back to Great Peace City, had his head chopped off by a hand blade and was kicked forward by the little girl. Chapter 863. Today's chapter. There will be a total of 6 chapters in the next 2 days. Su Fengnian originally wanted to end Jianghu with the battle at the Spring God Lake. This was already worthy of the saber training he had put in for the past few years. After returning to Biyao, it would be difficult for him to be completely focused. He had reached the 4th realm of the 1st rank and had already reached the false realm 3 times. Even if there was no one else who could do it in the future, it was still an unprecedented feat. Su Fengnian no longer had any hopes of increasing his realm in the future. It was enough for him to be a local tyrant in Biyao. But he never thought that the real game would be so tragic. Song Nianqing died in battle after being struck by an earth immortal. Lu Haoshi's celestial Shatterer realm even had to fight with Wang Xianji in the end. Su Fengnian stood quietly beside the white-clothed demon. He had already returned all his cultivation to Luo Yang. She had lost a lot of her realm. She should still be the 4th in the world, but the gap between her and Hong Jingyan and the others had inevitably shrunk. Su Fengnian himself was poor. His inner energy that had fallen to the 2nd rank was almost gone. If the body was a building full of qi, then Su Fengnian could be said to be a house with 4 bare walls. Lu Haoshi had destroyed the purple aura golden lotus seedling in the big yellow pond. This made him even more miserable. Su Fengnian silently recited the incantation. He tried to use the fire that he had comprehended in Beimang to condense his qi and observe the fire inside his body. Unfortunately, some of the fire started from the Yongquan acupoint under his feet. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight. It couldn't even pass through the Niwen. Su Fengnian's expression withered and he gave up struggling. A breeze blew across the countryside. The smell of soil assaulted his nose. Su Fengnian's hands and feet were cold. He could only put his hands in his sleeves to ward off the cold. Luo Yang asked indifferently, "How strong is Wang Xianji?" Su Fengnian stomped his feet and looked at the sky. He said softly, "Old monster Wang only used 50% of his strength when he took the 2 punches. In the end, he used about 80% of his strength." Luo Yang didn't comment on this. She calmly said, I'll take Danning back to Zhulu Mountain. We'll meet outside the city 3 years later. You only have a few flying swords that Dong Tai gave you, so don't die on the way back. He didn't die at the hands of Song Mianxing and Lu Hao, and he didn't die at the hands of Wang Xianji. If he died at the hands of a nobody, it would be a big joke. Su Fengnian smiled calmly and said, It is true that I do not have any backup plans, but the Zhao family's son of heaven is also at his wit's end. Without Han Diaoxi and Lu Haoshi, 2 top experts, Great Peace City is only slightly better than paper. If I were Chao Chongqing, would go directly to Jing and take the emperor's head. The Jianghu matters are over. In the future, it will depend on how Beiliang deals with each move. My martial cultivation is not important to the overall situation. Standing side by side, Luo Yang said disdainfully, in terms of family wealth, can your Su family beat the Zhao family? If Chao Chongqing dares to go to Great Peace City to cause trouble now, he probably won't have the life to revive his country. Su Fengnian frowned and said, Isn't there only the sneaky Wu family sword tomb left for the court to support? Luo Yang smiled coldly and asked, That's it? Su Fengnian said emotionally, Yes, my mother comes from the Wu family. Dong Tai is also from the Wu family. Wu Luding and his sword attendant Shui Hua are also from the Wu family. Song Mianxing's 14th sword already had such spirit. I think the master of the Su of Gojoseon's sword must be even more profound. Luo Yang hesitated and asked, Why don't you practice sword essence? Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, I have seen too many sword masters. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I don't dare. Su Fengnian suddenly came back to his senses. It's sword essence, not the sword. But Luo Yang had already disappeared. Standing where he was, Su Fengnian looked around. The world was clear, and the atmosphere was bleak. He was in a daze. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly closed his eyes and remembered many things of the past, many people of the past. His mind flashed to the scene where he had personally borrowed the sword at Yuyan Mountain Villa, Lu Songtao's useless song after his madness, and personally seeing the world and the city merge into a line. When a person had too much money, they would often be dazzled and not know what to treasure. Su Fengnian raised his arm and waved like he was pushing away an item on a messy table. The mountains, disperse. He did not see Wudong, Longhu, Hui Mountain, or any of the famed mountains. After waving away the mountains in his mind, Su Fengnian waved a second time. The rivers and seas, disperse. He did not see Chunshen, Boyang, Qingdu, or any of the Jianghu. He waved a third time. The towers, disperse. He did not see Xiangfan, Shenwu, Great Peace City, or any of the city's tall buildings. The fourth wave pushed back the grass and trees. The fifth wave pushed back the sun and moon. The sixth wave pushed back all life in the world. In this moment, Su Fengnian seemed to be alone in the world. His eyes were still closed, but he was looking around, in the darkness, searching for something. When Su Fengnian thought that he was going to return empty-handed, he suddenly realized that he could not open his eyes. It was like the many times when he encountered a ghost during his afternoon nap before practicing the blade. No matter how hard he tried, he could not open his eyes and regain clarity. It was clearly a sign of going astray. In the past, Su Fengnian had the Great Yellow Court of Taoism. No matter how heterogeneous or unconventional his cultivation was, he did not have to worry about falling into Qigong deviation. But now, the Great Yellow Court no longer existed. It was the moment when Su Fengnian's foundation was the most unstable. He had a sudden idea. He wanted to take advantage of the lingering effect after the peak battle with Wang Xianji to grab that rare enlightenment. He hoped that he could reach the sky in one step and directly enter the false realm of celestial phenomenon or even the land immortal. He wanted to learn from the Qi cultivators and obtain that fleeting and rare enlightenment. More haste, less speed. Moreover, Su Fengnian had experienced the false realm 3 times. Every time he ascended the realm, he should be walking on thin ice. Outsiders did not dare to imagine that someone would be as reckless as Su Fengnian. It was tantamount to courting death. Since he could not wake up, Su Fengnian actually laughed in the false realm that he did not know the depth of. Previously, he had brushed away the mountains and rivers. At this moment, he slowly hugged and gradually retracted all the mountains and rivers. It was said that it was easier to invite the spirit than to send it away. However, Su Fengnian found that the universe was completely reversed in this realm. Fortunately, he was not in a hurry. According to common sense, whether it was martial arts or the way of heaven, it was taboo to be unsettled. Su Fengnian simply did the opposite and let it go. Vaguely, Su Fengnian seemed to see Song Nianqing, who was holding a pair of cloth shoes, being carried into a carriage by a group of desolate sword pool disciples. He saw the back of a young girl kicking ahead. He saw a monk in a cassock flying over. He saw a white-clothed woman in a red robe returning. Then, Su Fengnian's vision was instantly cast thousands of miles away. He saw a young and elegant Taoist priest guarding a grave. He also saw the ebb and flow of the South Sea. A middle-aged swordsman cleaved the waves with his sword. He also saw a horse that was neither a horse nor a deer climbing up the mountain and arriving in front of the Taoist master's mansion. Finally, he saw a young child squatting by the river in a daze outside a small village with beautiful scenery. Suddenly, he was enlightened and his spiritual qi overflowed. When he returned to the village and saw the red paper cut on a window, the child felt an inexplicable joy. Su Fengnian finally opened his eyes and wiped his face. Unknowingly, his face was covered in tears. Chapter 864. I still owe 5 chapters. There was a rider riding towards the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. The horse's hooves were light and agile. The young rider wore a red fox fur hat with 2 strands of black and white hair hanging down from his temples. There was a short knife in a black sheath at his waist. The rider and the horse were not in a hurry to enter the villa. Instead, they dismounted and walked along the bluestone boards beside the spring god lake. It was noon and the sun was warm. The winter snow had melted and the lake water was as clear as a mirror. There was an endless stream of people enjoying the scenery. The changes in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa were too much for the eyes to take in. There was a series of rumors. When the Jianghu Great Emperor's Dharma form arrived at the lake, it was first the young master of the Yanbao Castle, Li Huoli, who led an urgent military order to return to the border with his elite cavalry and squires. Then, Xiaolingzhen of the Spring Invitation Cottage also left the villa. Yuqi Liangfu said that this old senior from the cottage had comprehended something while watching the lake and wanted to return to Shu to cultivate in seclusion. There was a chance for her to reach the celestial state in this lifetime. Li Bai of the Dongyue Sword Pool also said that he wanted to welcome his teacher, Song Nianqing, but his whereabouts were unknown. The Quicksnow Mountain Villa originally wanted to use the election of the Wulin Alliance to raise its reputation and status. With the departure of the 3 leaders one after another, it was about to become the laughing stock of the entire Jianghu. However, the appearance of the purple-clothed woman from Mount Hui, who had defeated 16 famous masters in a single day, was unparalleled in the limelight. It vaguely seemed like it wanted to take advantage of the situation to become the champion. This made many Jianghu people who were on their way back to the villa turn their horses around and rush into the Quicksnow Mountain Villa. This undoubtedly solved the urgent situation of the villa. If one didn't take a closer look, in this era where people relied on their clothes and Buddha relied on gold, a wandering swordsman with a saber on his horse was not eye-catching in the crowd. Most of the Jianghu people who could come to the Suishua Mountain Villa were heroes. Most of them relied on their sex background or their own names. Even if they couldn't be the richest in their hometown, they couldn't escape from being rich. Along the lakeside, there were plenty of Jianghu people wearing embroidered fox fur coats. If they didn't wear a mink hat that easily cost dozens of taels of silver, they would be too embarrassed to go out and greet others. Many beautiful women followed the heroes around, their eyes wandering, secretly comparing their wealth. There were also some Jianghu people who came with their wives and children. These people were undoubtedly more confident. Most of them were the direct descendants of the first and second-class sects in Jianghu. Those mischievous children who didn't have the slightest bit of stage fright ignored their parents' warnings and played around, as if they were passing through flowers to attract butterflies. Perhaps these children themselves didn't even know that there was a saying in the imperial court about the children of officials and the children of generals. They were equivalent to the children of aristocratic families in Jianghu. In the future, they would inherit their father's legacy and roam Jianghu. Obviously, they would be more successful than other people. The bustling Bluestone Road was filled with polite greetings from people who had long heard of their names, as well as people who were familiar with each other. A few pairs of children who happened to be good friends with their fathers quickly became familiar with each other. They ran amok together, laughing and chatting happily. Occasionally, they bumped into Jianghu people who were usually violent and ruthless, but today, they didn't mind putting on a rough smile and even reached out to rub the children's heads in a friendly manner. The children cleverly ran past with their heads bowed. Behind them, the helpless faces of their fathers didn't forget to cup their fists and smile at the men. If both sides were indifferent, they would pass by with a smile. If they were more clever, they would stop and exchange names. If it was convenient, they wouldn't have to spend a single copper coin to form a dispensable relationship. The group of children were like a few merrily swimming fish between the gaps of the crowd, becoming more and more intense. They had some foundation in lightness skill, so when they were in the mood, they unconsciously used their family's lightness skill. Coincidentally, someone was leading a horse and standing by the lake, looking at the vast and misty spring god lake. When the leading child was about to hit the horse's belly, he grabbed the horse's back with both hands and deftly flipped over, continuing to run forward. It was quite a stunning sight. Behind him, a young girl with long hair followed suit and flipped over the horse's back. The last child didn't have the same foundation, but he didn't want to take a detour, so he couldn't leap over and hit the horse's belly, falling to the ground. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the pain or because he felt that he had lost face in front of his childhood sweetheart, but he sat on the ground and wailed loudly. The young man with the red fox fur hat on his head heard the noise and let go of the reins. He smiled and reached out to help the child up. The child raised his head and looked at the stranger. Perhaps he thought that the stranger's smile was mocking him, so he cried even more heartbreakingly. The young master probably had a bad horse and fur hat, so he didn't have the air of nobility. That was why he was smiling so warmly and apologetically. He didn't know what to do when faced with the rowdy children who were rolling all over the ground. The two older children who had already leaped over the horse also turned back, eyeing the young man covetously. The boy who had leaped onto the horse first had a face full of anger. At such a young age, he already had a heroic air that couldn't be underestimated. The girl with drooping hair was a beauty, so her temper was also much gentler. Seeing that the culprit didn't look like a bad person, she only glared at him. Naturally, she was naturally charming and went to help her companion who was covered in dust and mud. Although the child who was being helped up was crying loudly, in fact, he had been keeping his eyes and ears open. When his brother and sister came to support him, and his parents also quickly walked over behind him, he suddenly became bold. He ran over to the guy who was leading the horse and blocking the road and fiercely kicked that person's calf. The young master dismissed it with a smile and lowered his head to pat the dust off. He didn't expect that the child was still angry and slapped the person in front of him on the head, knocking off the fox fur hat that was obviously not worth much. Only then did he grin proudly. After the hat fell off, the young man in his 20s with a saber revealed a head of hair that was similar to the hair on his temples. It was actually the gray color of old age, giving him a lifeless appearance. The young man shook his head and didn't argue with the naughty child. He took a few steps forward and bent down to pick up the fox fur hat that they depended on each other for survival. Unexpectedly, a soft whip, like a snake spitting out its tongue, hooked onto the fox fur hat that was indeed cheap and unsightly in quality. The whip lifted up and threw the hat high up. Then, this whip, which was praised in Jianghu as a tiger's tail, was like a snake coiling around. The head of the whip and the body of the whip collided with each other, creating a sound like firecrackers. After the vibration, the whip suddenly straightened and bounced onto the fur hat, forcing the hat to fall back to its owner, which happened to cover the young man's head. This scene really lived up to the old saying that a virtuous horse would be bullied by others. The young man must have been shocked by the child's elder's move. Amidst the cheers of the surrounding people who wished for the world to be in chaos, he quietly stood up and straightened the fox fur hat. He didn't even glance at the strong man who was shaking his hand with the whip. Chapter 865. Seeing the young man retreating after causing trouble, the man whose family had been tyrannical for generations in Liaodong was too lazy to beat him up. He was born with a short stature, but his wife was tall and enchanting. Not to mention other things, just her slender legs almost reached his ribs. A woman of this height was rare even in the north, let alone in the south. What was even more remarkable was her well-proportioned body and her twin peaks. Even though she was wearing a thick fur coat, she was unwilling to be left out. Beside them were two pairs of celestial couples who had deep connections with their families. They were all in their 30s. The men were masculine while the women were graceful. When the four of them saw this scene, which could not be said to be harmonious, they looked at each other and smiled. They did not agree, but there was pity in their eyes. However, they did not say a word of justice for the young stranger. When roaming the Jianghu, one should help those close to him and not those who were reasonable. Almost no one noticed that the spineless young man quietly made an imperceptible gesture of waving his hand after leading the horse and before pressing down the fox fur hat. Except for Zhou Qinghu, who had been watching coldly, because this woman's eyes were fixed on Su Qi, whom she had met for the first time on the Dragontail slope. She could not understand how a man who could make dozens of big devils retreat in the face of difficulties, who could be invited by the devil cult to climb the mountain and be conferred the title of Marquis, could be so down and out. Zhou Qinghu hesitated for a moment and walked to the side of the man who continued to look at the bleak winter scenery of Springshan Lake. Su Zhan, who had been with her day and night these days, followed closely behind. Su Zhan, who carried an ancestral long stick on his back, walked a few steps and was quickly recognized by some sharp-eyed guys. These days, Snow Mountain Villa had set up several arenas on Springshan Lake that cost a lot of money. In addition to the main arena that was stolen by the purple clothes of Mount Hui Mountain, there were several smaller arenas, which were also full of masters. Su Zhan amazed everyone in one of the arenas. He fought with an old swordsman in the northwest for 400 rounds and still won. Then he successfully defended the arena for 4 consecutive rounds before being defeated by the famous swordsman in the southeast, Xie Huaibai, who was thousands of miles above Su Zhan. Everyone suddenly remembered that Su Zhan's father, Su Dachu, had written Observing Skill scripture, and was once one of the top masters in the world. Because of Su Zhan's skills, the declining Su family was regarded by many martial arts seniors, especially masters in the Tuhuai River, as the hope of the family's revival. The Liaodong swordsman who was shorter than his wife put away his soft whip. Seeing Su Zhan's sudden appearance, he thought for a moment and then laughed heartily. He took the initiative to ask, "Are you Su Zhan, young master Su who carried forward the family's observing skill scripture?" Originally, Su Zhan did not have a good impression of these arrogant Jianghu heroes, but after being recognized, he still turned around, smiled and cupped his fists in return. He said, "I am Su Zhan. I have heard from my father's generation that the Feng family of Liaodong is full of masters. They can not only kill a tiger with one whip, but also have superb archery skills. Just the sound of pulling the bowstring can make birds startled and fall from the bough." When the illegitimate son of the Feng family of Liaodong heard these words, it could be said that he was tickled by Ma Gu, and it happened to tickle his itch. He felt comfortable all over. If it was someone else who flattered him, he would not take it to heart. But Su Zhan was different after all. He had profound knowledge that was not inferior to the Feng family of Liaodong. Su Zhan himself was also good at martial arts. In the future, he might not be unable to become a first-class master. Feng Maolin, who was famous only in the Liao and Liao regions, had excellent whip skills and archery skills. If the Feng family had not been disliked by Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, it would not have been difficult for Feng Maolin to get a real power with his family's ability. This time, in order to avoid trouble, Feng Maolin did not take the ox-horn bow with him to find an opportunity to show his talent in the south to the quick Snow Mountain Villa. Feng Maolin, who had not mastered the essence of the Feng family's whip skills, knew his own weight. It was very difficult for him to win many battles in a row like Su Zhan. It was difficult for him to stand out in Jianghu, but it was difficult for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin. Just because he was born of a concubine, he was suppressed by the son of the first wife. Practicing martial arts was a bottomless pit. A family with ambition to stand out in Jianghu could not take care of everything. Feng Maolin was like this, let alone the sons of ordinary families who practiced martial arts. The double expenses of medicinal materials to exercise their body, the double expenses of accumulating money or borrowing secret books, and the various expenses of moving famous masters to teach the family would make people speechless. Therefore, it was not bad for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin to practice martial arts. On the other side, Feng Maolin was trying to get close to Su Zhan. He introduced Su Zhan, who had become famous after one battle, to the husband and wife of the Feng family of Liaodong. They talked happily. Zhou Qinhu came to the young child who was standing still with his horse. He plucked up his courage and asked, "How did you change your personality? Why is your temper so good?" Su Fengnian turned his head to look at this old acquaintance of his in the Quicksnow Mountain villa. He smiled and did not speak. Zhou Qinhu recalled that after surviving that series of dangerous situations, he realized that this young master with an obscure background did not seem to be a domineering person. No matter how Hu Chunya rolled his eyes or provoked him, he did not see the slightest bit of anger. Zhou Qinhu glanced at the side of his face. For a moment, he was absent-minded. The reason why he was so calm in everything was because he did not care about the ups and downs of his group of people. Looking at the ups and downs of others' honor and disgrace was like watching children playing. Zhou Qinhu felt a little bored when she thought of this. She turned her head and saw Su Zhan talking and laughing with that group of people. They called each other brothers as if they regretted not having met each other earlier. During these days in the Quicksnow Mountain villa, Zhou Qinhu had seen the fickleness of human nature. With Su Zhan's fame, she was lucky enough to live alone in a courtyard in the villa. People from all walks of life came to the courtyard to make friends. She could not rest for a moment. Su Zhan also beat around the bush. One time when they sat opposite each other and drank, he almost revealed his heart under the guise of alcohol. However, she still diverted the topic. Zhou Qinhu had a good impression of Su Zhan, who had gone through fire and water with her. Unfortunately, it was not the love between a man and a woman. Zhou Qinhu only wanted to take advantage of her youth to travel more in Jianghu and see more strange stories. It did not matter whether she was accompanied or alone. Perhaps one day, there would be a man who could make her fall in love at first sight. That would be the day she left Jianghu. There were 3 reasons why Su Fengnian returned to the Quicksnow Mountain villa under the secret escort of the men of sacrifice. The first was to settle things with Lin Hongyuan of the Dragon Palace. She still owed him a Xian finger inscription. The second was to see if she could wait until the young hierarch Li Yufu to offer a toast to the wanderer He Zhu's grave on behalf of Miss Hehe. Then she would inform Li Yufu about the child's first enlightenment by the stream. The last was that according to the secret letter, Xianyuan Qingfeng had slaughtered his opponents in the main arena and seemed to be on the verge of winning the championship. Earlier he had promised to let her sit on the throne of the Wulin Union. If there was a chance, he would help her. Su Fengnian herself didn't have many thoughts about Jianghu. Other than the fact that the old bastard of the Zhao family hiding in Mount Longhu was not dead yet, other than that battle in the Eastern Sea that he didn't know whether or not he could fight, and other than the fact that he still missed her and her at Mount Zhulu, he had nothing else to be interested in. Whether he was willing or not, he had to leave before the matter was over. Fortunately, this time he was going back to Bailiang with Su Shao, who was waiting for him in Xiangfan. Chapter 866. Zhou Qinhu did not want to have too much to do with Su Qi, who was shrouded in clouds and mist. She glanced at the 2 strands of gray hair under his red fox fur hat and thought of an excuse to leave. In her heart, she had the natural sorrow of a woman. Those who practiced martial arts knew that thinking too much would consume one's qi and blood, which would not nourish one's bone marrow. However, Zhou Qinhu also knew her own limitations. The martial arts that she practiced would definitely not enter his eyes. While she was hesitating, she saw a young ranger with a wine pot hanging from his waist stride over. He slapped Su Qi's shoulder and laughed, calling out Su Qi's name. Then he turned to her and said respectfully, "Miss Zhou's yellow plum sword, I am Huang Liang, an anonymous disciple of Pure Heart Pavilion. Your reputation is like thunder in my ears. Su Fengnian saw Zhou Qinhu's puzzled look and explained with a smile, Brother Huang is a friend I met on the way to the snowy hills. He is an old Jianghu man and has taught me many things by word and example. He is a kind person and is worth making friends with. In fact, Huang Liang had been quietly observing the situation from the side. When he saw Su Zhan being played by the group of heroes, he had completely lost the intention to greet him. He was afraid that he would get into trouble. But he did not expect that Zhou Qinhu, who had recently risen to fame along with Su Zhan, would take the initiative to walk to the side of the horse by the lake. Hearing Su Zhan say that he was kind, Huang Liang accepted all of it without any guilt. After Zhou Qinhu heard Su Fengnian's words, she greeted this rogue Jianghu ranger out of courtesy. Su Fengnian picked up the reins and prepared to ride along the lake to find Lin Hongyuan, who had once held an ivory tablet in his hand and pretended to be a ghost. In addition to the dispensable stone inscription finger, Su Fengnian also had a newly learned interesting secret that he wanted to test Lin Hongyuan face to face. However, before Su Fengnian had a chance to escape, Su Zhan and Deng Maolin had arrived with their companions. Obviously, the son of a concubine from the Feng family of Liaodong had given Su Zhan face. He took the initiative to ask his young son to apologize to Su Fengnian, and then said that he wanted to board a colorful boat to watch the new round of the purple dress battle on the lake. Several arenas were built on the lake several miles away from the lake, and the spectators had to take a boat to watch the battle. However, the number of boats was limited, so boarding a boat did not depend on money, but on one's status in Jianghu and family's reputation. Every boat had a famous prostitute from the brothels of Xiangfan City. In order to build up the popularity of the Snowy Heights, Villa Master Weiqi Liangfu had put in a lot of effort. Most of the spectators from Jianghu did not have the ability to board a boat, and could only rent a small boat to ride between the big boats. However, there was a huge difference between riding a small boat and riding a boat, and it was not a pleasant feeling to be inferior to others. On the way to the ferry, Su Fengnian learned that Feng Maolin was from a wealthy family in Liaodong through Su Zhan's concise but clever introduction. The other two pairs of immortal heroes came from similar backgrounds, one from the Huai family, and the other from the southern Tang aristocratic family. There was an insurmountable gap between aristocratic families and aristocratic families, but for most of the people in Jianghu, it was not easy. It was like a prostitute, but an official prostitute was naturally more valuable than a private prostitute. When Huang Liang was traveling with Su Fengnian, there was nothing he did not know about astronomy and geography. But now, he was very cautious and nervous, and did not even dare to speak loudly. Especially when he was interrupted by Deng Maolin before he could finish his self-recommendation. Huang Liang did not take it seriously, and obediently followed behind the crowd. Taking advantage of the fact that the people in front of him could not see him, he put on a high and mighty air and cast sidelong glances at the people around him. When they boarded the boat, Su Fengnian was in a bit of a dilemma. He wanted to board the boat with the horse, but the little steward of Quicksnow Mountain Villa, who was in charge of all the affairs of the boat, did not take the Feng family of Liaodong seriously at all. How could he let a nobody from Jianghu bring an inferior horse to board the boat? Besides, did he know how much a seat could be sold for nowadays? This C-class boat cost 400 taels of silver. And it was priceless. Su Fengnian did not want to complicate things. After everyone had boarded the boat, he handed the horse's reins to a handyman of the villa, stuffed a piece of silver into his hand, and said, I'm Zhuo Jing from the Dragon Palace. Little brother, please inform a woman from the Dragon Palace named Lin Hongyuan that I'm on this C-class boat. If she has time, tell her to wait for me at this ferry. When the servant heard the words Dragon Palace, he immediately looked at the young man with a higher opinion. Dongyue Sword Pond, Chunty Cottage, and Wild Goose Castle left one after another. At this moment, the Dragon Palace was considered one of the top sects in the villa, and he could not afford to offend any of the people in it, even if they were just cats and dogs. He quietly restrained his arrogance, weighed the weight of the silver, and deliberately put on a troubled face. Young Master Zhuo, I have a hard life. I may not be able to leave for a while, and I'm afraid that I will delay your important business. Su Fengnian did not change his smile, and handed over the second piece of silver. Sorry to trouble you, little brother. He didn't expect that the young servant was also a quick-witted character. He pushed back the second piece of silver and said with a smile, I have received 10 taels of silver from young Master Zhua. I don't feel bad about the money, but I also want to take advantage of the opportunity to get some immortal aura. If I ask for more, then I will be seen as a man who is not content with money. Our Snow Mountain villa has strict rules. If by any chance the steward finds out, he will break my hands and feet. Young Master Zhua, don't worry. I will go and report to you. As for young Master's precious steed, this humble one will also have the stable feed it. This was the foundation of a noble family. A servant would be influenced by what he saw and heard, and his conduct would more or less reveal a sense of impartiality. Before the spring and autumn period, the people who sat on the dragon throne had changed one after another. The 10 great clans had always been able to rise and fall as the tide rose and fell. The reason why they were able to stand firm was because of the accumulation of all aspects behind the main branch and the side branch. Su Fengnian looked at the young servant who led the horse away. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind. Would such a guy, who was good at currying favor and was born in poverty, one day have a romantic relationship with a lady from a noble family like Wuxia Chronicles? Su Fengnian shook his head and turned back to board the boat. The double-decker colorful boat retracted its ladder, broke through the green lake, and slowly sailed toward the arena. Among the 7 or 8 colorful boats in the distance, 2 of them were 3-storied boats. Su Fengnian stood at the stern of the boat with his hands in his sleeves, silently resisting the bone-chilling breeze that caressed his face. Huang Liang was thick-skinned. Since he could not please the unapproachable couples, he went to play with the 3 children. The child who kicked Su Fengnian said he wanted to ride a horse. So, Huang Liang got down on all fours and let the child ride on his waist. Huang Liang smiled brightly. He looked like a dog. Su Fengnian used to laugh at Huang Liang's clumsy showing off in his mind, but this time, he could not laugh. Zhou Qinhu could not stand the utilitarian laughter of Su Zhan and the others, so she came out to take a breath of fresh air and stood by the railing near Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, Miss Zhou, you have earned the name of Huang Mei Sword? Chapter 867. At first, Zhou Qinhu thought he was mocking her, but seeing his calm smile and not knowing how to respond, she did not respond. Although she understood the ways of the world, she did not want to do things against her will and speak against her will. This made people feel that she was cold and distant. In fact, to be able to escort Huang Shang to the capital, one could see that she was a warm-hearted and kind-hearted woman. Su Fengnian hid his hands in his sleeves and gently leaned on the railing. He squinted his eyes and smiled. When I was young, I always wanted to be a famous hero. I wanted to be the type where women would fall in love with me wherever I went. That's why I often discussed with my 2 elder sisters what kind of nickname we should use when we roam the Jianghu in the future. At that time, we wrote down dozens of names on a piece of paper, but we were not satisfied with any of them. They were either not imposing enough or too obscure. I also thought that it would be good to find a beautiful heroine to be my wife. Later, I found out that it was not easy to be a heroine. Practicing martial arts all year round, it was difficult to have tender skin. Not to mention other things, just looking at how awe-inspiring she was when she rode a horse would cause her but to have calluses. What's more, he had to worry about those followers who prostrated themselves under the skirt of a pomegranate. If by any chance he encountered a highly skilled flower thief, or a local hedonistic son of a rich family who was fond of heroines, it would be even more of a headache. I remember the first time I roamed Jianghu, I saw a famous one. Her makeup was so thick that you could smell it from miles away. Her entire body, from the hairpins on her face to the bracelets on her hands, from the clothes on her feet to the boots on her feet, she had a good background. Afterwards, I found out that every shop paid her at least 100 or 200 taels of silver every year. Over time, I did not believe in heroines. I felt that calling a woman a heroine was like scolding her. Zhou Qinhu smiled sweetly. Su Fengnian sighed. Jianghu is actually very similar to the old Western Shu. Before the world was in chaos, Shu was in chaos. The duck knows when the spring river is warm. When the central government is in turmoil, it will inevitably affect other places. Even before the central government is settled, Jianghu is already in a state of panic. Those large and small gangs in Jianghu find a husband early and enjoy life early. Those who marry late or not often do not have the family background to support them. Most of them will be bullied. From the small fish and shrimp of the fish dragon gang to the sword-making family of the Yuyan mountain villa, none of them were spared. I heard that the young king of Jing'an in Xiangfan City is interested in taking a concubine. I don't know how long the snow mountain villa can last. Zhou Qinhu suddenly went straight to the point and asked, "Young Master Su, may I ask if the Dongyue Sword Pond Cottage and Wild Goose Castle leaving the villa together has anything to do with you?" Su Fengnian asked in return, "Miss Zhou thinks so highly of me. Why don't you just ask me if I invited Great Emperor Jianwu?" Zhou Qinghu was about to speak when Su Fengnian smiled and said, "By the way, I'm temporarily a minion of the Dragon Palace in the old southern Tang Empire. My name is Zhou Jing. If someone asks about me in the future, Miss Zhou can answer this way." Zhou Qinhu nodded. Su Fengnian turned around and saw Huang Liang, who was crawling on the outside of the ship, with a calm expression on his face. Zhou Qinhu did not see the slightest fluctuation in his beautiful peach blossom eyes. Not to mention the reasonable disdain and ridicule, she did not even feel pity for him. Zhou Qinhu said his goodbyes and walked into the warm-as spring cabin. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing again, feeling bored. So, he softly hummed a nameless tune that was widely circulated in Biyao. "Don't you see the fishes in the northern underworld swim for tens of thousands of miles? Don't you see the immortals at the peak of Kunlun pass through the heaven's gate? Don't you see the men riding lightly out of the cold and returning with their corpses? Don't you see the women leaning on the door until their hair turns white, since there were men of sacrifice secretly escorting him?" Su Fengnian did not deliberately suppress his sleepiness. He rested his chin on his sleeves that were still warm from his hands and closed his eyes. A small boat with a black canopy quickly cut across the calm lake. A woman dressed in green and holding a white hat leaped onto the colorful boat and stood at the other side of the stern. With a complicated look in her eyes, she called out softly, "Young Master Zhua." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and turned his head without turning around. "Young Palace Master Lin, I'm honored by your presence. Forgive me for not welcoming you." The young woman, who had never shown up in the Quicksnow Mountain Villa as Lin Hongyuan, now had a look of respect from the bottom of her heart. Compared to when they had first met, the look in her eyes was one of hatred. In Lin Hongyuan's mind, Zhao Ningxin was the reincarnation of the founder of the first generation of Longhu Mountain. He would definitely become the #1 person in the world in the future. With the addition of Yu Yiqing, he would have more weight than His Royal Highness in the bitter cold of the northern region. Lin Hongyuan was a woman who didn't remember good things or bad things. However, if she was really hit hard and hurt, she would still remember a little. Previously, when she got along with that bastard surnamed Su, her schemes were seen through every time. That guy wouldn't show any mercy to her. Now, Lin Hongyuan didn't know whether she hated him more or was afraid of him more. Lin Hongyuan, who had changed into the face of a female official of the Dragon Palace, was about to move. Su Fengnian said, "I received a secret report that the eldest son of Zhao Bing, king of Yanqi, was hiding in the team of the Dragon Palace. He should not be the bearded man. So you are really arrogant to let the crown prince carry the bed for you." Lin Hongyuan's face suddenly turned pale. Su Fengnian looked at the small boat with a black canopy following the colorful boat. Master Hao was an ordinary strong man. Su Fengnian waved to him. The young man hesitated for a moment and jumped onto the stern. After no longer hiding, he suddenly became high-spirited and heroic. He waved to Lin Hongyuan, making the woman who wanted to say something but hesitated to keep quiet. In the vast Nanjiang, Nalan Yusi could come and go as he pleased with Zhao Bing, king of Yanqi. Only His Royal Highness favored him and regarded him as a friend of the same generation. In terms of reputation, this Zhao Zhu, His Royal Highness, was better than the first Prince Zhao Wu. If it was a few years ago, if anyone compared Zhao Zhu with Su Fengnian of Biyao, it was tantamount to insulting His Royal Highness of King of Yanqi. Zhao Zhu grinned and said, "Xiaonian, do you remember the little beggar who wanted to learn sword from your mother in Dantong Pass? Su Fengnian said flatly, I don't remember. Zhao Zhu looked resentful. He squatted on the ground and bit his finger, sighing. Lin Hongyuan was flabbergasted. In Nanjiang, there was a secret message circulating in a small circle. It said that the reason why Mr. Nalan was willing to stay in King of Yanqi was that he liked Zhao Zhu's ambition to go north. Zhao Zhu joined the army at the age of 12. Ever since his father, the king, helped him build his first small tomb with several heads to show off his military exploits, Zhao Zhu had killed people like flies, gathered the corpses of his enemies, and sealed the tall tombs. In the past few years, he had built a total of 21 temples. All the barbarians in Nanjiang surrendered. Zhao Zhu's favorite thing to do was never to pretend to be cultured, but to secretly go south with dozens of retainers. Often, he would go and come back for a month, uprooting the enemy's strongholds hidden deep in the miasma, leaving no survivors. Every time His Highness didn't show up for a banquet or event, everyone immediately understood that His Highness had slipped away to slaughter people again. But at this time, facing Su Fengnian, Zhao Zhu didn't know why he was so gentle, respectful, and thrifty. He raised his head and said sadly, Xiaonian, you're no longer the good brother who took off his pants to compare size with me. Su Fengnian scolded, is there a brother who owes money for more than 10 years and doesn't pay it back? Zhao Zhu immediately laughed and threw a bag of copper coins to Su Fengnian, here. When we parted, you said that you wanted to be a hero. You also told me earnestly that I shouldn't become an old beggar. I've always remembered it in my heart. I didn't want to spend a single coin in this bag of copper coins. Su Fengnian caught the cloth pouch that was sewn together and was speechless. Chapter 868. The man surnamed Jiang almost vomited blood. Ji Lu and was the palace master of Dragon Palace, and Qing Baishuang was the #1 guest. They were the top masters in Nanjiang. Lin Hongyuan had always had the reputation of young palace master Lin. Any one of them was an unattainable bodhisattva. The Jiang family didn't even have the time to burn incense and pray to God. How could they have the courage to provoke them? This surly man kept saying that he didn't know them. King don't know them, but you still said a bunch of catchy words. When the bigwigs of the Dragon Palace went out, there would be female officials holding ceremonial rites to clear the way. Moreover, this woman spoke in a familiar local accent, which made the man's surname Jiang realize in hindsight. He had to remind the phone couple not to overestimate themselves. Not only would they lose face, but they would also cause his family to be punished and ostracized so that they could not have a foothold in the southern Tang world. Who didn't know that Dragon Palace was Mr. Nalan's favorite maid? If the fairy like Mr. Nalan heard it, his whole family would be drowned. Zhao Zhu pointed to the child in the woman's arms. You want to find Yuqi Liangfu to reason. No problem. Leave the baby and throw the body in front of Yuqi Liangfu. You will definitely be in the right even if you don't want to. Su Fengnian said, that's enough. The stern suddenly became silent. Zhao Zhu drank honestly, and Lin Hongyuan didn't say anything. Feng Maolin also understood the situation. After weighing the pros and cons, he chose to suffer in silence. He broke away from his friend's support and staggered back to the cabin. According to the cultivation method passed down from his ancestors, he operated his qi and breathed out the old and took in the new. Su Fengnian asked, Zhao Zhu, how did you become a beggar? I remember that at that time, although the dragon's descendants lived in fear, they didn't have to worry about food and clothing. Zhao Zhu threw the empty wine pot into the lake, rubbed his cheeks, and said with a smile, it's a long story. Anyway, now my brothers must be secretly wondering why I didn't starve to death in Dantong Pass. Every family had its own difficulties. Once it was mentioned, it would be awkward and painful. Lin Hongyuan stood in the distance and felt relieved. Since Su and His Royal Highness were old acquaintances, the key point was that anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was a genuine friendship and not a pretense of civility. Then whether or not he taught Su's secret steel inscription of the Dragon Palace was of no importance. He didn't need to worry about being caught by others in the future. However, Lin Hongyuan was a little disappointed. It seemed that he couldn't hope to make Su into a human puppet in this lifetime. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at this guy who was not in Nanjiang. Do you have nothing better to do than to be Lin Hongyuan's servant? Leaning on the railing, Zhao Zhu lazily said, I've never been in the pugilistic world, so I won't have any chances in the future. As for doing odd jobs for Lin Hongyuan, I'll just take it as learning from you that you have a tender heart for the fairer sex. I can't just walk around and say that I'm Zhao Zhu. Heroes of Jianghu, come and kill me if you can. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. I have a deep understanding of this. Zhao Zhu softly said, I originally wanted to sneak a trip to Biyao. I wanted to go to my aunt's grave and burn 3 incense sticks no matter what. My father also agreed and said that I'll take his share. However, it seems that I can't go. You also know that West Chu is about to be reinstated. My father temporarily decided to let me lead 8,000 elite cavalry north to loot a burning house. If you came 2 days later, we would have passed by each other. Su Fengnian self-deprecatingly said, it won't be peaceful again. I don't understand why Chao Chongqing wants to reinstate the country. Zhao Zhu gazed into the distance and said indifferently, it's not strange at all. It's just like how the people of the world don't understand why Uncle Su is still unwilling to betray Li Yang and directly defected to Northern Mang even though our Zhao family is making things difficult for your Su family. Su Fengnian smiled and said, let's not talk about surrendering to Beimang. How many people can we bring with us? 300,000 cavalry. However, a person should still have a bottom line. Zhao Zhu turned around and leaned against the railing. He asked, Xiaonian, do you know what I admire the most about Uncle Su? Su Fengnian handed the half-empty wine pot to Zhao Zhu. Zhao Zhu raised his head and took a big gulp before throwing it to Lin Hongyuan. Su Fengnian said, is it because he didn't draw a river to conquer? Zhao Zhu sighed heavily and said, after I took charge of the army alone, I often deduced the battle situation with Mr. Naylan. Every time, I was on Uncle Su's side and adopted the strategy of drawing a river to claim the throne. Without exception, I suffered a crushing defeat. At first, I thought that my calculation was not meticulous enough, but even last year, I still lost. I admit that Uncle Su's cavalry, no matter how powerful they are, lost because they are still an isolated army, isolated scholars, isolated people, and isolated orthodoxy. Once they claim the throne, they will be isolated. If they don't claim the throne, they will disappoint many generals and soldiers. Once they claim the throne, they won't be conspicuous at first, but as long as they lose their irresistible morale, their decline will soon be exposed. Everyone will kick a man who is down. They won't even have the extravagant hope of making a comeback. Mr. Naylan once said that if a commoner wants to sit on the throne, he will have to wait for the cold people to get used to power. Therefore, it will take at least 300 or 400 years. Uncle Su was born at the wrong time. Otherwise, I would be chatting with the crown prince right now. Su Fengnian fell into deep thought. Zhao Zhu suddenly asked with a cold smile, Xiaonian, how did you become a clay bodhisattva without anger? Is it because Biyao is too cold? Su Fengnian calmly said, back then, when Su Xiao pulled a group of people out of Liaodong, he couldn't do it without money. So, he borrowed money from many people. Many people felt that the money couldn't be borrowed and would definitely be wasted. So, they simply closed their doors and refused to visit. Only the Feng family and the other 2 families were thin-skinned at that time. They couldn't endure Su Xiao's pestering. Together, they gave him more than 60 taels of silver. Although Su Xiao secretly returned a few favors after he became famous, he still talked to me about the dozens of taels of silver. He said that it was more important than the 10,000 taels of gold that he would get in the future. If it weren't for those pitiful pieces of silver, he almost didn't have the determination to leave Liaodong. Zhao Zhu nodded and sighed, I understand. ### this month's update. Last month, I owed 5 chapters. This month, I will slowly make up for it. In December, I will go abroad for almost 10 days. Therefore, my goal is not high. I will only write 1 chapter every day. The chapter of White Dragon Suit was not included in today's update. Therefore, I still owe 4 chapters. Author's note, Shuesher is still Shuesher. Reading is like meeting people. Some people may find it boring at first, but they will continue to read. Occasionally, they will be very satisfied. Some people will be shocked at first sight. Then, they will continue to ask the woman to be otherworldly and put on airs like a fairy. Over time, they will be disappointed. Shuesher is a story of beads. Those who are even more impatient can just change the book and pick it up when they remember it. ##### chatting while writing. If I don't promise to update, I won't break my promise. It's a very simple reason. However, after weighing the two options, I will either be scolded for not keeping my promise or have to calm down and write. After weighing the two options, I feel that it is more worth it to write more chapters. First, let me explain something. In the past, when I wrote books, there was absolutely no notice of absence. Of course, this is not a good thing. The last time I chatted with Jingguan, as well as on the phone with Tomcat, we talked about this point. I'm a writer who's publicly acknowledged to have a terrible character, but now I'm actually nagging someone about the unfairness of Unix and the importance of stable updates. Even I can't imagine it. If you want to say that I'm a good-for-nothing big shot, that I wasn't a big shot when I was an ambitious person? That God wasn't a big shot? That Urgu and Toad weren't big shots? To be honest, Shuesher is my least big shot work. Compared to the previous scams, I gave fewer promises and more notifications. I also had the most chapters. I also had the most interactions with readers. The number of times I clenched my teeth and persevered was undoubtedly the most. Therefore, if there are old readers who want to show off their superiority and tell you about the past, don't be in a hurry to scold them for being a brainless fan. You have to know that these brothers who appear to be impervious to fire and water have already been shot in the heart. They are just clenching their teeth and forcing a smile. Furthermore, there are many new people who have fallen into my trap. Sooner or later, they will unfortunately become one of them. Who knows what will happen in the future? Although I am an author, I am also a reader. The age of a web novel reader is almost twice that of an author. Therefore, I have never cared about pirated posts. This is because I read pirated posts myself. I don't have the right to give advice. At most, I use my identity as a second-rate, third-rate, or fourth-rate author to recommend works that I really like as a way to make up for it. If I have to say that I'm a big shot, it would be the overly impetuous readers. As always, I don't like them. It was the same when I was writing scams. Back then, I would often argue with readers in the comments section. I wouldn't stop even if I were to argue with them. However, I don't have the willpower and mentality anymore. Firstly, I feel that it is useless. No one can convince the other. Secondly, authors still rely on their works to prove themselves. Of course, this impetuousness isn't the scolding when the chapters are interrupted. It is the skimming through the contents of the chapters. There are many long-winded chapters in Snow. Even I find it annoying. Actually, they are all explaining things that have been hinted at. When you fill in the gaps, some people don't even realize it and only feel confused. The author can only helplessly do something superfluous, even sacrificing part of their reading habits. Previously, when they said that they are impatient to change their reading habits, they are referring to those who are obsessed with the content of the book. I can understand this small group of people, but I don't agree with them. In Snow, there are actually many climaxes of varying sizes. As for the content that I like, it has always been hidden. Every time someone mentions it, it will be like scratching an itch. For example, the battle between Luo Yang and Heaven and Earth. What I thought was the climax wasn't Luo Yang's dominance, but Song Nianxing's pair of cloth shoes. She was the old woman who had been waiting for her husband to return home. I used to say that an author's greatest responsibility is to write seriously. Now, I should change it to writing seriously and steadily. I can temporarily not do well, but after all, I have to persevere and work hard on this path. Chapter 869. Time to write. In the evening, he wrote about a plot that he had been longing for a long time. He had thought about it since the old headmaster carried Hong Shixiang to Wudong on a snowy night. Li Yufu brought back a child who had just enlightened his orifices. This was like a circle. Hashtag number 94 Wudang Peach Charm. There were many hills in Jiangnan. There were different sounds 10 miles away and different customs 100 miles away. There were less than 100 families in Yu village. The simple yellow mud houses were built on the mountainside. There was a mountain behind them and a mountain in front of them. The river flowed at the foot of the mountain. Yu village was sandwiched between two villages. Yu village had never produced any talents. They didn't even have a scholar, let alone a powerful official. They had always been bullied by the other two villages. Every summer, they would be bullied. They only dared to secretly dig up the small dam used by the neighboring villages to cut off the water and pour it into their own fields. There was a local custom of dancing with a bamboo horse. Yu village was so shabby that those who rode bamboo horses to beg for money were not willing to enter the village. Every time, the children in the village could only follow behind and risk being bullied to go to the neighboring villages to watch the fun. There were very few people in Yu village who didn't have the surname Yu. This was because if a man wanted to marry a wife, he could only look for a wife in his own village. It was called keeping the goodies within the family, unlike the two neighboring villages, where every year, there would be wives from other villages marrying into the village. The parents of the mentally retarded Senyako were both surnamed Yu. The in-laws lived at the head of the village and the end of the village. They ate and walked, but they didn't even finish half a bowl of rice before they reached the door. Senyako looked delicate. In the local dialect, he drank too much bewitching soup when he was reincarnated and couldn't be enlightened in this life. His parents took him dozens of miles away to a famous witch to summon his soul, but they couldn't get his soul back from the king of hell. However, which village didn't have one or two fools? The child's parents had already accepted their fate. In the future, they would spend more money and casually find a woman to marry. Even if they didn't, they would still be able to continue the family line. However, the people of the Yu family village had been clicking their tongues in amazement during this period of time. They didn't know why Senyako had suddenly become enlightened. In the past, he only knew how to smile and drool non-stop when he met people. Now, he was actually clean and even knew to greet the elders of the village based on his seniority. Only the Song village next door, which was relatively wealthy, had a thatched cottage and a village school. It did not belong to the Song village's ancestral school, so it was willing to accept the children of other surnames. Every day when he returned to the village, he would scribble scribbles on the ground. Only later did the villagers realize that the scribbles were indeed words from books. That private tutor, who may or may not have achieved scholarly honors, settled down in the village 20 years ago and never left. The amount of lessons he taught was only 300,000, the 3 basic axes of enlightenment. It was not rare, and he had never said anything shocking. He was probably just a rotten scholar with a rough understanding of literature. Furthermore, his accent was thick, making it difficult for the children entering the village to get used to it. For some unknown reason, the 60-year-old private tutor had taken a liking to Senyako. Not only did he purposely place a small wooden stool outside the window, in his spare time, he also intentionally or unintentionally taught the child the etiquette of entering a Confucian school. Since he did not ask Yu Fu's parents for a monetary gift, he also did not have the child kowtow to enter the school. At the entrance of Song village, there was an old locust tree with an empty belly. The old locust tree had been leaning against a rock and water for who knows how many hundreds of years. In any case, the Song family's genealogy could be traced back 400 years. The Song family's ancestor was still not as old as the locust tree. A young Taoist carrying a peach-wood sword and a cotton bag walked on the crooked muddy road. He stood under the old locust tree and looked out. Suddenly, he saw the 3 villages in a row. In the winter, the stream was sluggish. Many things were revealed. A Taoist with an elegant temperament rarely seen in the countryside walked along the small path created by people all year round and squatted by the stream. He scooped up a handful of cool stream water and gently washed his face. He heard the sound of chickens and dogs barking. With a face full of smiles, he stood up. A few village children of different ages squatted on the bank. The braver ones asked him if he was an immortal who could catch demons and drive away ghosts. The Taoist in plain robes smiled warmly and shook his head. The disappointed children immediately scattered like birds and beasts. The Taoist walked into the village. In front of the house, there were many old people carrying bamboo baskets embedded with iron sheets and charcoal for heating. They lazily sat on tree stumps and basked in the sun. When they met a rare Taoist, there was some simple curiosity and respect in their eyes. They did not know how to greet him and were afraid of offending him, so they just greeted him with a smile. The young Taoist with clear eyes was born with a kind face and did not deliberately return the greeting. He walked and stopped in the village and followed the sound of reading until he reached the front of the village school. He saw Yu Fu sitting on a small bench under the window and shaking his head. His back was small and thin, and he seemed to have forgotten himself. The young Taoist stopped and looked away. He quietly shook his clothes and horsetail whisk. Only then did he walk forward and stand beside Yu Fu to listen to the sounds together. After the old pedant set the reading time, he did not sit upright. Instead, he stood by the window on the other side of Yu Fu, one hand behind his back and the other holding a book. He nodded from time to time. When the children finished reciting the book, the old pedant was about to speak when he inadvertently saw the Taoist outside the window. He was surprised and quickly walked out of the simple and crude hut. The young Taoist bowed and said, "I am Li Yufu. I used to cultivate on Mount Wudong." The old pedant who received the greeting was flattered and said, "So it is the Taoist master who cultivated on Mount Wudong. I am Su Liang. I am ashamed to be a teacher. If there is anything wrong with my teaching, I hope Taoist master will not be stingy with your advice." The young Taoist shook his head and said with a smile, "Mr. Su is too serious. I have traveled around this time. Before I return to the mountain, I will be bold enough to look for an opportunity. In the future, there may be many disturbances." Su Liang, who had always been rigid and strict in front of children, laughed and said, "Taoist master is too polite, too polite." Nowadays, there was almost no limit to the venerated Taoist master Huang in the imperial court. As long as it was not a wandering Taoist who wore a Taoist robe and deliberately cheated the money of foolish people, the imperial court was very respectful to the recorded Taoist masters. There were many Taoist temples in the world, and the two celestial mountains of Mount Longhu and Mount Wudong were the leaders. In the eyes of the villagers, as long as it was a Taoist master who came out of these two blessed places, regardless of age, he was a Taoist master. If this Taoist master who called himself Li Yufu was not too young, Su Liang, who did have some knowledge in his stomach, would have respectfully called him an immortal. As for the battle of the ancestral court and the ascension of the immortals, these villages did not care. Even if they heard about it, they could only be speechless. After the delicate Yu Fu stood up from the bench, he did not leave. He listened quietly at the side. Su Liang glanced at the child, who he thought had spiritual qi, and said with a half-genuine half-fake smile, "Since Taoist master has come to look for an opportunity, take a look at this child. His surname is Yu and his name is Fu. His surname and name are ordinary, but when they are stacked together, they are not vulgar. Yu Fu, the accumulation of good fortune for the rest of one's life. What a good name. When I was young, I also learned some facial features. Although I don't think he is rich, I feel happy from the bottom of my heart. Taoist Master Li, why don't you open your third eye?" Li Yufu squatted down and stared at Yu Fu, who was not afraid to look at him, and said softly, "I don't dare to talk nonsense." The old man, who did not hear the praise, was a little regretful. However, after experiencing the wind and rain, he knew that many blessings could not be forced. Otherwise, he would not be willing to be a poor teacher in this village. Chapter 870. Then, a Taoist priest named Li inexplicably lived in the Yu family village. He didn't stay with the villagers. There were many green bamboos on the mountain, so he spent half a year building a bamboo house. When he was free, he would weave bamboo baskets and distribute them to the villagers. If a villager gave him rice, wine or food, he would return a large basket of winter bamboo shoots. He also patiently helped many children chop bamboo to make flutes and taught them how to play them. The villagers were willing to ask him for help when they had some happy events. If someone got into a small disaster or a small illness, the young Taoist priest would take the initiative to go deep into the mountains to pick herbs. He even acted like a doctor, helping people look, listen, ask questions, and feel the pulse, silently dredging the meridians. Over time, not only the nearby villages, but also the people within 100 miles knew that the Yu family village's ancestral grave was emitting green smoke. It was actually able to let a young immortal stay in the back mountain to cultivate. When Su Liang was free, he would go to the bamboo house to ask Jinrenli for advice on cultivation. Yu Fu often went there as well. In the sound of firecrackers, he bid farewell to the old year and exchanged the new peach for the old talisman. Yu Fu's parents, who had always been unable to raise their heads in the village, felt very proud because the spring festival couplet hanging on Jinrenli's bamboo door was written by their son. Since Jinrenli came and became close to Yu Fu's parents' voices in the village became louder. Every time a few good-looking girls in the village happened to meet the young Taoist priest on the bluestone path in the village, they would smile and walk slowly with their heads down shyly. When they brushed past each other, they would quietly look back. Some of the women who were already married would definitely not be so reserved. When they were washing clothes with the elegant young man by the stream, they spoke without restraint. Every time they saw the young Taoist priest in a Taoist robe blushing, the women would look at each other and laugh, secretly thinking that he was really a thin-skinned handsome guy. If he returned to the secular world in the future, any woman who could marry him would be a great blessing. In the blink of an eye, the winter snow melted, and suddenly the spring flowers bloomed. The willows sprouted tender yellow, and the green carp came with the sound of the stream. Every morning, when the sun rose from the east and climbed up the mountain, the villagers who got up early to farm could see a pleasing scene. Under the leadership of Jinrenli, a group of children practiced boxing together in front of the bamboo building. Although it was called boxing, it was actually just drawing circles there, but it looked really good from a distance. Day after day, spring went and summer came. Except for his elegant appearance, Jinrenli was no different from a villager in other aspects. He gave all the money he got from picking herbs and selling them to a few old widows and widows in the village. As long as there was a busy farm work in the village, he would definitely show up if the children ran a few steps to inform him. Previously, after the Guyu rain, he was transplanting rice seedlings. Almost every day, he could be seen bending over in different fields. Unexpectedly, he was self-taught and skilled in transplanting rice seedlings. Probably influenced by him, the 3 villages that used to fight for water in the past were much more amiable now. They were more considerate and less bullied others. After the private teacher Su Liang got drunk, he always nagged the elders of the village not to delay Jinrenli's cultivation because of the farm work. At first, the villagers were a little nervous, but later, when they saw that Jinrenli was still the same Jinrenli who would grant any request, they were relieved. During this period, someone said that he saw a tiger go down the mountain with his own eyes. When Jinrenli stood there, the king of the mountain obediently turned around and ran back to the deep mountains and forests. The ignorant villagers increasingly felt that if there were really immortals in the world, they would be nothing more than this. At dusk between summer and autumn, the summer heat on the mountain faded. Yu Fu and the private teacher Su Liang were sitting in front of the bamboo building to enjoy the shade. Li Yufu was sitting on a small stool, weaving a bamboo basket with her fingers. The child, who was already very familiar with Jinrenli, squatted next to her and asked, "Is Mount Wudang very high?" Li Yufu stopped weaving the basket and said softly, "When I was young, I had to walk for a long time. Maybe I thought it was high. When I grew up, I didn't think it was high." The child smiled and asked, "Does it snow on Mount Wudang?" Li Yufu raised her head and looked at the mountain opposite. She pursed her lips, then nodded and said with a smile, "Of course. When my master's master carried my Shishu up the mountain, it snowed heavily. I remember Shishu told me that he was woken up the next day. Standing on the little lotus peak, he looked like a big steamed bun, which made people drool." Yufu asked again, "Can I go to Wudang to have a look?" Li Yufu did not speak this time, but just smiled. Su Liang was not a pedantic fool. He looked kindly at Yu Fu and touched his head. Then, He turned to look at Li Yufu of Wudong and said softly, "Since it's fate, why don't you bring him to Taoism? This is a great thing for Yufu and his family." Li Yufu said with a firm look, "We cultivate to achieve immortality. We don't violate human relations and don't violate reason. As long as the parents are here, there must be a way to travel." The old man sighed and said, "Since Jinren said that there must be a way to travel, it means that it's not impossible to travel far. As long as the child's parents are settled down and there are no worries, he has done his filial duty." Li Yufu smiled warmly and said, "There's no harm in waiting." Su Liang hesitated for a moment and asked in a deep voice, "Jinrenli, there's something I don't know if I should ask." Li Yufu nodded and said, "Please go ahead." Su Liang gritted his teeth and said, "I took the opportunity to go to the market at the end of the year and asked about the situation of Wudong Mountain in the city. I heard that the current leader's surname is Li, living here. He could see the mountain as soon as he opened the door." Li Yufu said calmly, "It's me." Su Liang suddenly stood up as if he had been struck by lightning. His lips trembled and he was at a loss. Li Yufu smiled and put down the half-woven basket. He stood up and pulled the old tutor back to the bamboo chair, then continued to work. Su Liang muttered to himself as if he had lost his mind, "How can there be an immortal like you?" Another year passed, and Li Yufu came to Yufu's house to give him a bunch of Spring Festival couplets. Yufu's father shamelessly asked Jinrenli for several Spring Festival couplets. He didn't leave out any of the couplets from his father-in-law and several distant relatives. When Jinrenli was about to turn and leave, Yufu's father blushed and felt uneasy. He wanted to say something but hesitated. His wife pulled his cuff several times, but the man didn't have the courage to speak. The man also knew that it was not a good idea to be so stiff. He had heard that a storyteller once said that killing someone was just a matter of nodding. The man scratched his head and took a bag from his wife. He grinned and said honestly, "Jinrenli, my wife is pregnant again. Moreover, the world is peaceful now. People in the mountains are not afraid of having more children and can afford to raise them. I was wondering if I could ask Jinren to accept Yufu as your disciple. If this boy becomes successful, our Yu family will also be blessed. Jinrenli, we don't have much money at home, so we just saved up this money. I know you don't want this, but if you can accept Yufu, even if we owe him money, we will definitely pay him back in the future." Li Yufu pushed back the bag of money, then took Yufu's hand and bowed deeply to the couple. The man, who rarely called children by their real names, was afraid that Jinrenli would go back on his word, so he hurriedly shouted, "Yufu, kowtow to master." Li Yufu let go of Yufu's hand and took 3 steps back, folding his hands on his lower abdomen. Yufu knelt down and kowtowed 3 times heavily. When Yufu kowtowed for the first time, Li Yufu had already raised his arm and covered his eyes with his sleeve, but he still couldn't hide the tears on his face. That year, it snowed heavily in Wudong. Li Yufu, the leader, brought back a disciple named Yufu. When the young leader went up the mountain with the child on his back, the drowsy child held a string of bright red candied haws in his hand. After reaching the top of Wudong, the young Taoist with his disciple on his back looked into the distance and choked with sobs. "Little Shishu, we're back." Chapter 871. After Lin Hongyuan showed off his identity as the Dragon Palace, he was immediately invited to an elegant cabin on the 2nd floor. Zhao Zhu's eyes lit up when he entered the cabin. There was a woman sitting on a large green banana leaf, holding a small Yenju Kong Ho in her arms. Her left hand held the Kong Ho while her right hand pulled the strings. Her eyes were moist. The woman's appearance was not extraordinary, but she was slender and delicate, causing people to feel pity for her. The Kong Ho originated in the western regions, flourished in the southern Tang dynasty, and stopped in Liang. Because a certain noblewoman in the imperial court did not want the sound of the Kong Ho to spread throughout the court, and the famous scholars and Confucian scholars added fuel to the fire by slandering the Kong Ho's decadent sound. Thus, it was gradually overshadowed by the similar guzheng. The wife of Yi Baikue, the head of the famous generals of the spring and autumn period, was famous for playing the Kong Ho. Zhao Zhu quickly approached the woman on the banana leaf and squatted down. He waved his hand at the thin woman, indicating for her to play the strings. He closed his eyes and listened. Under the woman's fingers, the music lingered and Zhao Zhu listened attentively. Su Fengnian looked at this guy with new eyes. Lin Hongyuan dismissed the maidservants and personally poured tea. He explained in a low voice, His Highness is proficient in music. He is an expert in the guqin, zheng, flute, drum, kongho, and so on. There was an untimely knock on the door outside the cabin. Lin Hongyuan got up and opened the door. The second-class steward of the Quicksnow Mountain Villa suppressed his excitement and tried to speak in a calm tone, reporting to the Dragon Palace Ferry, "We just received news that the Mount Hui Mountain Master, Xianyuan Qingfeng, has put up a life and death contract on the main arena. Whoever can withstand 10 moves from her can choose any 3 secret manuals of Mount Hui. Whoever can defeat her will be the master of Mount Hui." The Mount Hui Mountain Master also threatened that if no one accepted the challenge or knocked her out of the arena, then the title of Wulin Alliance would fall into the hands of the Xianyuan family. But today, as long as someone enters the arena, she will not show any mercy. At this moment, everyone is excited and waiting for our villa master to start the competition. Lin Hongyuan nodded. The steward lowered his head and left in a hurry. He thought that the woman in purple was really a noble of the villa. She wanted to fight against Jianghu alone. No matter who won or lost in the end, it would be a big gimmick. Anyway, it would be beneficial to the Snow Villa. More than 20 large ships gradually dropped their anchors and stopped, surrounding a large square platform on the lake. Colorful flags fluttered in the wind. Among the huge ships, there were more than 100 somewhat shabby little black boats. There were all kinds of people, and the atmosphere was vigorous. The Wulin world was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, and the Jianghu was surging with great momentum. Su Fengnian, Zhao Zhu, and Lin Hongyuan all walked to the bow of the ship on the second floor. Compared to the crowded first floor, the second floor was much more empty. A few Jianghu heroes who were particular about putting on airs moved a large number of people to bring chairs over. They sized up Su Fengnian and the other two. However, among the 3 of them, apart from Lin Hongyuan, who was holding the green go, who could be considered to have a bit of style, the other 2 did not seem to have any weight, so they did not pay much attention to them. Zhao Zhu touched the bridge of his nose, which was somewhat frozen red, and said in a low voice, "Originally, I thought that if that little beauty holding the Kong Ho was an assassin, that would be good. In this trip to Jianghu, other than being a coolie for young Palace Master Lin, who doesn't even earn half a copper coin, I haven't seen any big scenes. Looking at those few hair-raising battles of yours, it's really infuriating." On the arena, the woman in purple stood in the center with an overbearing aura. She really did have the meaning of a peerless talent of her generation. In the future, who knew how many Jianghu heroes would find it difficult to let go of this scene? Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and sneered, "You built so many temples in Nanjiang, were they all just to fool people?" Zhao Zhu laughed foolishly and said, "A real man doesn't boast about his past glory. This year, I didn't cause much trouble. Mr. Nayland said it well, to be kind to others, one must be kind to others." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. Zhao Zhu suddenly gave Su Fengnian a bear hug and patted Su Fengnian's back with all his strength. "Brother, big brother will go back first. Seeing you is enough. If I don't hurry back, Mr. Nayland will lecture me again. If he is determined not to let you go, he can talk for hours without drinking a sip of tea. I am not afraid of the heavens or the earth, but I am afraid of his foot-binding preaching." Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment and asked, "You didn't see how Mount Hui Mountain's mountain chieftain went on a killing spree?" Zhao Zhu let go and shook his head. "So what if he became a Wulin Alliance leader? So what if he became the world's #1? It's meaningless." Su Fengnian sent Zhao Zhu and Lin Hongyuan to the stern of the first floor. The colorful boat was tied to the small boat with a black awning. Before Zhao Zhu left, he took out a copper coin from his money pouch and stuffed it into Su Fengnian's hand. He smiled brightly and said, "I, Zhao Zhu, can be considered a half-baked noble descendant of the heavens. In this lifetime, I have only known you as my friend. Whether or not you remember our old friendship, I, Zhao Zhu, will not forget. No matter how good or bad this world is in the future, as long as you are willing to come to my side, as long as I, Zhao Zhu, have food to eat, you won't starve, Su Fengnian. Other than not being able to send you your wife and son, everything else is fine. Su Fengnian held the copper coin and didn't say anything. Lin Hongyuan said softly to Su Fengnian apologetically, His Royal Highness, I'm afraid that I will have to think of a way to send the mysterious steel rubbing finger to Biyao later. I hope you will forgive me. Chapter 872. Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. He did not dislike this woman who was good at scheming. Because of Zhao Zhu, he did not mind giving her a way out. Of the vassals of the dynasty, the king of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, was in charge of the two Liao provinces, but it was too close to Graydon City and could not be said to be far away from the emperor. In reality, only Su Xiao and Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi, were true to their name. If Zhao Zhu was not the eldest son of Zhao Bing, these words with hidden meaning would be suspected of not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Zhao Zhu had grown his wings much earlier than Su Fengnian. As long as he made military contributions in the rise and fall of West Chu, it would be justified for the Liang dynasty to have a third hereditary emperor. Su Fengnian waited for Zhao Zhu to jump onto the small boat. He grabbed the bamboo pole and said with a smile, Little beggar, if the ritual collapses again, come to Biyao, I guarantee you will not be an old beggar. Zhao Zhu said with a bitter face, Should I say thank you for your auspicious words or curse you for your inauspicious mouth? Su Fengnian laughed and waved his hand. Go back to your Nanjiang. Zhao Zhu patted his chest with a fist and leisurely rowed the boat away. After the boat sailed out of the lake, Lin Hongyuan asked carefully, Your Highness, how about this servant paddle the boat? Zhao Zhu threw the bamboo pole to Lin Hongyuan and stood proudly with his arms around his chest. Lin Hongyuan dared to play tricks with Su Fengnian, but did not have the guts to play tricks with Shitzi Zhao Zhu, who had made great military contributions. Nanjiang was already in place. In reality, many people knew this, but they did not dare to think deeply and did not dare to say it out loud. Mr. Naylan was just waiting for the words, right time. Zhao Zhu said softly, If I become the emperor, I will not believe in ghosts and gods but in people's hearts. Lin Hongyuan almost could not hold the pole. Zhao Zhu said with a smile, What are you afraid of? Lin Hongyuan said with a pale face, This servant did not hear anything. Zhao Zhu muttered to himself, If I ask Su Fengnian to use the 300,000 iron cavalry of northern Liang to exchange for a position that is second only to one person and above 10,000 people, as well as a position that will last for generations, would he trade? Lin Hongyuan was silent. He would rather die than say anything. In the outer corridor of the colorful boat, Huang Liang, who used to go wherever there was a lively scene, was still squatting at the foot of the outer corridor wall in a daze, even though the purple-clothed man had already appeared on the arena. Previously, he was riding Feng Maolin's beloved son, so his knees were covered with dust. At that time, some Jianghu people on the boat rolled their eyes, but Huang Liang did not care. As long as he boarded Feng Maolin's big ship, although distant water could not quench the present thirst, it meant that he could take advantage of the situation to hook up with the famous couple in Huai River Jianghu. Their young daughter, when Huang Liang was riding Feng Maolin's horse, he had also flattered her many times. The little girl did not show him a good face and always ignored him. But Huang Liang did not think it was shameful. Since he was in Jianghu, he could do whatever he wanted. As long as he made a name for himself, who would care if he was a dog when he was down? Besides, didn't dogs also know how to dog paddle? But what made Huang Liang's heart sink was that Feng Maolin and his wife, who were unattainable in his eyes, were beaten by the friends surnamed Su and could not fight back. Huang Liang had always regarded the guy, whom he met by chance, as a fool with a lot of money. He was shocked that he knew Su Zhan and Zhou Qinhu, and wished that he could eat a few caddies of beef and drink a few caddies of good wine to calm himself down. But he did not have the money to buy any wine. When Feng Maolin and his men were forced to swallow the bitter pill, Huang Liang knew that all his efforts were in vain. Su Xiaoshu would no longer allow him to swindle food and drink as he used to, and Feng Maolin might even vent his anger on him, a little pawn who could be easily bullied. Some people in Jianghu would eventually become successful, but most people would spend their whole lives in Jianghu. Huang Liang was not afraid of suffering, but he was afraid that he would not see a chance to become a decent man. How great was the ability of a hero to be worthy of the word hero? What kind of divine ability did an immortal have to be called an immortal? Sometimes, Huang Liang, who had always been seeking personal gain, would wonder if he had never entered Jianghu. Huang Liang, who was stunned, leaned against the wooden wall and finally came to his senses. He rubbed his cheeks and suddenly found that the light was a little dim. When he looked up, he was startled and fell to the ground. Su Zhan, who was wearing a funny red fox fur hat, was leaning against the wall with his feet tied in knots and his hands in his sleeves. Huang Liang, do you still remember how we met? Su Fengnian asked calmly. Huang Liang thought that this man was going to settle accounts with him and beat him when he was down. He smiled bitterly and said, "At that time, I was as blind as a bat and asked for wine from young master." Su Fengnian shook his head. At that time, a child beggar sneaked into the restaurant and tried to beg for some food, but he was caught by a sharp-eyed waiter. One of the diners saw that the beggar's hands were full of frostbite and blood, so he poured half a bowl of wine into the beggar's hands. Among the people who were drinking on the first floor, you were the only one who hesitated for a long time. Finally, you couldn't stand it anymore, so you stood up for him and said something fair. Only then did the beggar stop being treated as entertainment. At that time, I thought of a friend who had left Jianghu. That was why I asked you to drink. Of course, you did not hesitate and ate and drank with a clear conscience all the way. Huang Liang chuckled. Su Fengnian saw a mighty warship approaching abruptly and saw an old man standing at the bow. He was slightly absent-minded. He pressed down on his fox fur hat and turned to Huang Liang. When Mount Hui's Xianyuan Qingfeng wins the arena and becomes the Wulian Alliance master, do you dare to say a few words to her? Huang Liang was stunned. He smiled awkwardly and said, "That depends on what you want to say." Su Fengnian walked to the railing and said, "You can say that a man named Su Fengnian asked you to go to Mount Hui to make a living." Huang Liang watched as the man who did not call himself Su Qi jumped over the railing and floated toward another huge warship that looked particularly majestic. Su Fengnian? Who was that? Huang Liang was confused, but he felt that he should try his luck. At worst, he would be sent flying by a slap from the Mount Hui's mountain lord. Most likely, he would not die. Many years later, an old man who had Mount Hui as his backer but still failed to make a name for himself would still tell his grandson before his death that his grandfather used to roam Jianghu with that man. Chapter 873. There was no armor on the Yellow Dragon battleship. In addition to a slightly hunched old man, there was only a majestic man with a pair of silkworm eyebrows beside him. He always looked like a tiger taking a nap. A little distance behind him stood a middle-aged man with a spear. Su Fengnian gently floated behind. He exchanged a glance with the old man and then greeted Yuan Zuozong. He did not forget to nod to the retainer named Lu Yanbing in the distance. As Wang Xiu's junior fellow apprentice, this person had always lived in the shadow of Immortal of Spear. He was not famous and had never done anything shocking. Therefore, Lu Yanbing's cultivation was unfathomable. Su Xiao, who had left Beiliang with a simple entourage, took Su Fengnian to the railing and said with a smile, "I remember the last time I was at the Spring God Lake, I fought with Wang Mingyang of Xiangfan City. This time I took the opportunity to take a look. The lake is still the same lake, but it is much livelier and livelier than before when there were corpses and starving people everywhere." Along the way, she witnessed everything with her own eyes. Only then did she realize that Zhao Heng and Zhao Sun, this pair of father and son, were truly proficient in governing the various administrative matters within their jurisdiction. Just by casually drinking tea in the city, one could hear the commoners praising Prince Jingan. I have always thought that if an official in the imperial court was criticized and impeached by the imperial censor, he might not be a corrupt official. But if the people in the territory said he was good, most of them were really good. At the mention of the young vassal king that he had kicked into the spring lake, Su Fengnian sneered. Luckily, he had a first-rate strategist by his side. Otherwise, Zhao Sun would have long been eaten up by the Green Party. The Green Party, which relied on unity to achieve success, was torn apart by Zhang Julu in just a few moves. They were completely unable to compete with the Zhang party and the Gu party. However, to deal with Zhao Sun, whose prestige was not enough to suppress Qingzhou, wasn't it easy? Liang's surname is Zhao, but whether Xiangfan City and Qingzhou's surname is Zhao, who cares? It was someone who helped him sort out the situation and build relationships. He told those old foxes about the benefits. He threw away the bait of marrying a concubine and purposely helped the son of a Green Party boss get a real power position in Tian City. Afterwards, he used other people to tell the truth. Zhao Sun did not have these real bait and favors, he would only be reduced to the same conduct as the Duke of Huainan. Su Xiao grabbed the railing with both hands and laughed. It was that blind Lu Su who gambled with you at Yongzi Alley. The 2 strategies and 14 strategies were written by him. I have seen it. Even a brute like me can understand it. Not simple. Zhao Heng, that woman, has been making mistakes all her life. Only this marriage was done beautifully. In Ishan's words, there was no smoke and fire. When the conditions are right, success will come naturally. That is why people cannot be too smooth. When things are too smooth, they can only rely on themselves. They still want to save face and are not willing to do desperate actions. Su Fengnian asked, why did you think of leaving Biyao? Yuan Ergu and Lu Qiu'er, these newcomers are replacing old generals. Biyao is in turmoil in everyone's eyes. Plus, with the east wind that the Biyao cavalry broke through the border last time, Dong Zhuo and Hong Jingyan and Beimang are not as restrained as before. Aren't you afraid that Beimang will retaliate and catch us off guard? What if there is someone in Biyao?